Chapter 306. If Delphine goes over to Voldemort's side, and as I said, no matter for what reasons, I will have to follow her or break the contract, which is fraught with consequences both magical and social. All masters are members of the corresponding guilds or other organizations or at least registered there. Copies of the contracts are stored there as well. The reasons for termination, the consequences thereof, and other information, including the party that terminated it, all this is indicated in these guilds. Changing the life values of a master is not a valid reason, which means that if I take this step, it will be very difficult for me to master transfiguration, chimerology, and healing. In addition, such a step will ruin relations with the head of the green grass house. The chain of consequences can be dragged indefinitely. Don't be stupid, funny boy. You have a huge store of knowledge in your head. In this case, there is one simple way out with ambiguous consequences. This will solve the current problem, but in the future, it may add new ones. Indeed. Books, rules, foundations, guild codes. Leaning back in my chair, I looked intently at the thoughtful Delphine. How do you look at the option in which your +1 will be me? Lady Greengrass looked up at me, full of genuine surprise, and I continued my thought. If my memory serves me right, the position of apprentice to the master allows me to play the role of an accompanying person at social events without any loss of honor. This way, we will be able to achieve several goals at once. On the one hand, my obvious kinship with the House of Black for adult wizards from old families and my presence next to you as an apprentice will create a number of questions that they will definitely want to get answers to. For example, how aware of my own lineage am I? What is my position in the house? What I can dispose of and what I can't? In what disciplines are you a master after all? This question is known to few people, as I understand it. What is your strength level? What is the extent of our cooperation? What is going on? Those who are more familiar with the past and were present at the Dark Lord's resurrection will ask the far more serious and unpleasant question: did Henry Greengrass burn in the fire of Protego Diabolica due to ignorance and oversight, or were there other reasons? Particularly cunning and experienced people can imagine, no one knows what. For example, that in the absence of worthy successors, young Max Knight was able to gain supremacy over the House of Black. Then asked to be an apprentice of the head of the Green Grass House. By prior agreement, they decided to bury Henry, and an experienced and rather powerful schemer, the head of Greengrass, decided to combine the assets, knowledge, and connections of two influential noble families under her strict guidance, using an ancient and trouble-free method. I've never seen Lady Greengrass's eyes open so wide. She looked at me as if she saw a tame Nundu, which is a priori nonsense. Delphine blinked a couple of times, and her lips began to stretch into a smile, and after a couple of seconds, she laughed loudly, leaning back in her chair. When she stopped laughing, she looked at me with a look full of amusement. That sounds so delusional and unnatural that it's easy to believe something like that. She didn't hide her satisfied smile. Exactly, I smiled back. Confirm nothing, deny nothing, and their minds will paint themselves a similar picture. Such an appearance will make the smart ones diligently dig the ground with their noses in search of information, and the alternatively gifted ones will hurry to move from planned actions to hasty ones, seeing that the potential for control is flowing out of their hands like sand. They'll give themselves and their plans away. Delphine's smile turned predatory and her gaze sharp. And then a preemptive strike can be made. Moreover, directly at the reception itself, this will bring down all plans. Yes. This will give time until Hogwarts, in which Astoria and Daphne will be relatively safe, and they will be able to influence them only through other students, but even then not too actively. This means there will be time before Christmas to quiet all the zealots. All I have to do to mislead everybody is to be a gentleman to you and succumb to some provocation, and I'm sure there will be some. Well, and kick someone's ass. Aren't you afraid? Go into the Dark Lord's lair. I'm worried. By the way, if we accept this plan for execution, then I will have to get information somewhere about acceptable measures of behavior at such receptions. No problem. I will send you a couple of books and memories of such events by mail, especially rich in various events. However, your status as a disciple, on the one hand, is a restriction, and on the other a carte blanche. So what do? We proceed according to your plan. Then, I got up from the chair and walked over to the Delphine sitting there, holding out my hand in a slight bow. Allow me, Lady Greengrass, to invite you to a very dubious event at the house of the Malfoy family, and at the same time, the headquarters of the Dark Lord and the Death Eaters. Delphine was instantly transformed, trying on the image of a flirtatious girl, and gave her hand. With pleasure, Lord Black, she smiled dazzlingly and, holding my hand, rose from her chair. And will you be able to play a little bit of a loving and selfless young man? She continued to smile the same way. With your beauty and dazzling smile, it won't be a problem. I'm flattered. Delphine gave out a slight curtsy, and then her face returned to seriousness. Let's not waste any time. We should both get ready. I'll send the parcel today. Returning to my serious mood, I nodded. Then I'm going home immediately. After saying goodbye, I threw the bag that was already packed on my shoulder. Together with Lady Greengrass, we reached the apparition area and moved each in our own direction. Chapter 307. Once I was in the familiar dark alley beside the Grimald house, I apparat back to the night house. It was evening, and they should still be home. Once inside, I made my way to the kitchen, where Sarah and John were enjoying their tea. Good evening, I hugged Sarah with a smile and shook John's hand. I just came in for a second. Are you all set? Yes, Max. John, whom I almost called father in my mind, nodded seriously. In my previous life, I had a hard time with my relatives because of their actual disregard for my existence, and in this one, my own father wanted to kill me, so I don't like this word. But wow! We've already packed everything in our suitcases, Sarah smiled. Then you should get on the next flight out. It might be hot soon, and I can't guarantee anything. I see. You, Max, take care of yourself. I will try my best. Only after that, with a clear conscience, I apparat back to the dark alley on Grimald and hurriedly cast a muggle-repelling spell on myself, quickly heading home. Once inside, I took the 3 porcelain werewolf figurines out of my bag and, handing the bag to Kriaker, who quickly appeared, I headed to the ritual hall. I'd been here before, just to look around. The room was quite featureless, large and spacious, deep underground, and the yellow glowing walls and floor were made as if they were a single monolith of a very smooth, grey, stone-like material. You could draw or carve diagrams on it and then reconstruct. Still, it's a good thing wizards build houses that are as self-sufficient and autonomous as possible. In fact, you can lock yourself in here and never go out at all. Such houses have everything. Well, depending on the family's capabilities and requirements. I know what you are up to, and I even know what you want me to start calculating. To begin with, perform each spell from the series without activation so that you can feel the contour, and I can start analyzing it. Taking my wand out of the holster on my forearm, I began to perform each of the 12 spells to create the Shadow Architect. I didn't have any problems with each individual spell. I clearly felt when its contour was finally formed and when it was ready for activation. Rowena processed all these sensations, helping me interpret them, based on my experience, into a visual structure, the likeness of which I had seen long ago, back when Professor Flitwick was showing Hermione and me his magic showing device. It is easier to search for and isolate dependencies in visualized structures, making algorithms and understanding which part of the circuit is responsible for what. That's what Rowena ended up doing, promising me a strong headache and slight fatigue because she was going to work at maximum capacity, also demanding hemomancy and magical amplification at the limit of capabilities. What for the magic complex for creating an architect is, as they say, antediluvian. In those days, they did not use arithmancy to justify or create spells, trying everything on their own experience. Therefore, it's possible to understand some specifics and the essence of this magic only in this way, by adjusting the formulas to the existing magic. While Rowena was terrorizing the body's resources, I started creating a ritual scheme. This is a simple matter. You create a little blood with hemomancy, which, as I now know, is not blood at all, and having clearly imagined this scheme, you carve it into the surface. The Black's ritual hall is very good, and the surface here is perfectly smooth, and most importantly, uniform. The influence of the surface on the scheme is reduced to almost zero. By my will, a ball of blood formed in the air and immediately threw out bloody threads a centimeter thick, starting with their help to slowly engrave on the floor surface. 10 minutes of thoughtful work, and here on the floor, there is a complex scheme of several circles one in another, drawn along and across with runes, lines, figures, and incomprehensible symbols. However, they turned out to be incomprehensible only at first glance, and my memory gave me the appropriate literature, an old and forgotten version of the runes. Well, not so old. It's just that at one time, or rather in the 13th century, the wizards of England decided to create their own unique magical language based on runes but gave up doing it. Although those 24 symbols quite coped with the role assigned to them and successfully carried magical, esoteric, and other meanings. In general, nothing supernatural. After the promised half an hour, Rowena gave me the result of the analysis, and now I had a good idea of the essence of the complex of spells. But in order to understand it, I had to lure a headache potion from Kriaker, a certain supply of which, like some others, has been safely stored under stasis for many years and has not deteriorated at all. This technology could have been used at Hogwarts as well, but, in fact, storage with stasis spells is a complicated artifact, and the school always has no money, but there is a potion maker. Chapter 308. After drinking the potion and waiting 10 minutes for it to work and bring my head back to normal, I began to think about the results of the analysis. The essence of the spell complex to create the Shadow Architect is quite simple. In modern terms, from the flesh and energy of the victim, increased with the help of not the most painless death and part of the ritual scheme, a pseudo-intelligent entity is created that can manipulate the transfiguration of space and matter. Through spells and corresponding images, a special, I would even say, a unique scheme of transfiguration is laid, controlled by a built-in mental block. The essence of uniqueness is the absence of a specific subject of transfiguration and the limitation on the final result. Classical transfiguration involves clear visual contact with an object or its visualization. For example, there is a solid cube of granite with an iron sphere inside in front of you. You can transfigure both the cube and the orb at the same time, seeing the cube, but relying only on your vision. You cannot transfigure the orb without affecting the cube. However, if you know that there is an orb inside and are able to visualize it in your mind, then even without visual contact, but with the exact direction of the contour of the spell by means of a wand or will to the location of the orb inside the cube, it can be transfigured without problems. Here the unknown master has surpassed himself and probably all contemporaries. The visualization of the idea of the shadow itself is laid in the mental block. As a result, the subject of transfiguration becomes everything that fits the mental mold of the image of this idea. On the other hand, a limitation came out of considerations of saving the magic inherent in the architect. Only the transformation of the object is used for transfiguration. And here is the trick: transformation through the transfiguration of space. Such an approach, specifically, in this case, works murderously well. For example, a disc hangs in the air and casts a round shadow on the ground, and the space between them forms a kind of cone. Transformation through the transfiguration of space allows you to literally grow anything from a shaded circle on the earth within the formed cone, while the grown object due to the transfiguration of space will simultaneously be both matter and not. That is, for the mental block of the architect, it will be a matter with which he can, for example, pierce the target, but the target cannot affect him. Only with magic. At the same time, the consumption of magic for manipulations is lower, compared to the same manipulations performed by a wizard. This is due to the fact that there are no unnecessary thoughts in the mental block. He does not need to concentrate to filter them out, and so on, tied to consciousness. However, due to the fact that only something with a soul can consciously use magic, the architect is mentally connected to the creator wizard for the successful completion of the task. Apparently, the architect uses the crumbs of the mind and the fact that there is a soul for the targeted use of his capabilities. Otherwise, he would simply transfigure everything that falls under the mental image into arbitrary structures. So, in essence, the shadow architect is also a pseudo-material artifact that will not work without a wizard or a soul. Realizing the information I received from Rowena, I immediately made acceptable adjustments to the spells, changing them slightly. Now, instead of 1 sacrifice, you can bring 3, and the architect himself will not be a pseudo-material, but a completely material ball the size of a football. But before we start preparing, Rowena, try to materialize my sword. Intriguing. I simply stretched my hand out to the side without doing anything else, and after a brief moment, it was covered in a bloody film for a moment, which immediately flowed to my palm, forming my spirit sword. Without a doubt this is it. Easy. Well done, Rowena. Dispelling the sword, I pulled out 3 figurines of werewolves from my pocket. I returned them to their human form with a reverse spell from the grimoire, immediately paralyzing them with magic with a wand. Just 3 unpleasant-looking wizards in rags. They are quite old for werewolves and clearly share the bloodlust of their animal essence. It was literally showed on their faces. Well, when I was in a state of split consciousness and smashed that vile office of dark dealers, oddly enough, I punished only the guilty, somehow realizing that they were complete bastards. The arguments were simple: no one will worry about them because these are real maniacs, and they are alive only due to kickbacks to DMLE employees and aurors. Corruption is everywhere. With a wave of my wand, I stacked the bodies on top of each other, and with the second, I started transfiguration from living to living, creating a single organism from them without any special changes. Quite strange Siamese twins turned out. Well, it's okay. Chapter 309. As soon as I brought the werewolves to their senses, a stream of curses and obscenities poured into my ears, promising me such things that I even decided to remember some options. What if I have to kill someone with a very sophisticated method? Having moved the resulting organism by levitation to the center of the ritual scheme, I activated it with one gesture, paralyzing the losers. Along the way, I decided to conduct another experiment, the essence of which was to use on this organism not only the ritual but also the method by which I increased the power and resources of the werewolf organisms to the maximum before absorbing it. Then, in Nocturne Alley, pointing my hand at the resulting organic creature swearing in 3 voices, I threw a resonance spell at them, imbuing it with a small amount of hemomancy energy and directing this energy itself into their bodies. Along with this, the ritual was finally launched, the scheme of which glowed blue, immersing the ritual hall in a mystical blue light. The 3 fused bodies immediately screamed wildly, absorbed in the agony of torment similar to cruciatus. At the same time, my method of pumping up their resources, wearing out the body, began its work, which, apparently, is also very painful. Occlumency helped to detach consciousness from the heartbreaking screams of the trio of murderers and calmly do my job, controlling the process. The change of the hue of the glow of the ritual scheme to red marked the end of the first stage and the beginning of the second. The 3 voices instantly died away. Their flesh began to shrink, fall off, crumple. It's time to cast a spell. The hand with the wand, like a real conductor fencer, drew incredible pretzels in the air, but I myself was silent, having recognized and determined the constructs of spells, and with the help of Rowena, I could conjure them without words, directing the magic in the right way by will. It's not the coolest achievement, and it still requires a lot of concentration, but it's still better than reading 39 words in Latin and hoping that the saliva that suddenly formed in your mouth will not distort the sound of some word. The bodies of the 3 unfortunates had long since been transformed into a bloody, incomprehensible sphere hanging above the floor, glowing red, which, as the wand moved, became more and more dense, becoming blacker. With the last outline of the spell complex, the sphere finally formed to the size of a football, the ritual scheme faded, and the walls of the ritual hall began to glow softly yellow again. I walked quickly toward the sphere, stretching out my hand in front of it. Rowena, materialize the sword and give it a clear setting to absorb essence, abilities, A and D. I don't know, improvise, but you need to confidently absorb it, retaining all functionality while connecting it to the soul and body, as if. Say no more. I know what you want before you say it in your mind. It seemed as if the sword materialized by itself, with a pleasant weightless weight, no matter how paradoxical it may be, lying in hand. Pierce it. Without a swing, I poked the sphere with the tip of my sword, and it literally sucked into its blade, spreading over it like a black blot, disappearing. Done. Analyzing the result. I dispelled the sword with my will, and there was a very slight weakness in my body. Sitting on the floor right here, without moving from my place, I waited for an answer from Rowena, staring blankly at the floor. Your plan succeeded, Rowena's voice echoed in my head after just a moment. Can you demonstrate it doesn't work like that? It takes a little more willpower on your part to give more magic. I can run the process myself, but this way, you'll adapt faster to the architect's ability as your own. Concentrating quite a bit on the desire to call the architect, I noticed how shadows floated under me, vibrated, as if in a child's nightmare, and a thin layer of black smoke appeared from under my clothes and on the exposed areas of my body. Just a moment and a black, impenetrable female figure in a dress seemed to separate from me. Just a contour, but black as the abyss. Interesting, she spoke in an altered feminine voice, muffled, with metallic and hissing notes, raising her hand in front of her. It feels strange. Not like a body at all. The strange thing here, I said, rising to my feet, is that your voice is not in my head. I can sound in your head, too, but it's more interesting. It's like I'm in transgression. The body is held at will, and the sensations are emulation. I got used to feeling everything like that. Try more voluminous and large-scale manipulations. Yes, sir. A completely black female figure in a long dress suddenly saluted. A wave of black shadow literally spread across the floor from the black figure with tremendous speed, enveloping the floor and walls of the hall in strange ornate images and figures, and in the next instant long and sharp coal-black spikes grew out of them almost instantly, surrounding us. I felt the magic in my body seem to strain a little, wasting a tangible but far from the critical amount of energy on these manipulations. Your knowledge, Rowena spoke in her new voice, of physics, light, and other things, along with your vision of the concept of the universe, quite amusingly formed into a mental cast for the architect. What's funny? The thorns have grown into the walls, and the black shadows that have nowhere to come from have dissipated. Rowena's figure itself fell, like an empty garment, immediately disappearing. With a mental block like that, this ability doesn't even care if there's a shadow around in the usual sense. You can use the shadow of atoms on others, just the absence of light, or simulate understanding depending on one's point of view. For example, there is a bright hall with omnidirectional lighting. However, if you look at it from the other side, here, the shadow is from the ceiling, and the light source for it is lighting from outside. Or the shadow from the earth on the earth itself when the sun does not shine on it. The point of view is everything. It's a simple mental block. The wizard's vision is decisive. I was hoping for such a result. And now, sleep. Recovery is required. Not much, but it's required. Chapter 310. I had 3 days of training with the architect's abilities, although, as I had planned, he was completely under Rowena's control when he was absorbed, and I was learning how to control these abilities through her. Basically, if you translate these abilities into spells, you get a very effective and not particularly resource-intensive combat transfiguration, but the trick is that I don't need any circuits to control these abilities at all. It is as if I am in direct contact with the area of space I need, and on the will alone, fed by magic, I create the necessary objects from the shadow, simultaneously playing with the transfiguration of space. It is a pity that it is limited to the semblance of transgression for the shadow objects created. But an unexpected side of this ability was revealed, and not even one, an extraordinary increase in the volume of magic produced, albeit small, when adding the energy of hemomancy to magic in a ratio of 1 to 2, transfigured shadows are able to literally shred magical circuits and energy products of the activation of circuits. For example, the Protogo shield is not an obstacle to objects transfigured from the shadow at all. Lady Greengrass sent the books and memories, as promised. There is no point in parsing them in detail, for all the rules of conduct and permissible actions or reactions to the actions of other wizards boil down to one notion: behave with restraint and courtesy, and respond to the actions of others with honor. The essence of behavior as a student comes down to about the same thing, but with the understanding that there are 2 of you, and each is kind of responsible for the other. That said, etiquette takes precedence. Simply put, if your master is insulted, you have every right to stand up for him in the resulting conflict, but etiquette comes into play. If the student and the master are of the same sex, you should act according to seniority, that is, you should not get ahead of the master, but if you really want to, you should address the master: "Let me kick this asshole's ass." If the student and the master are of different sex, then the lady and gentleman scheme works. In my case, if someone insults Lady Greengrass, then I, as a gentleman accompanying a lady, have every right to reap everyone involved to shreds. That said, the duplicity of this approach allows one to juggle concepts, situations, and responsibilities for each other's actions with incredible dexterity. What does this mean? Someone insults Lady Greengrass, I intervene, and the offender says, "Your student should know his place," or something like that. Lady Greengrass could say, "He is primarily a gentleman," and it turns out that the offender has already inflicted 2 insults. And this initiative can be thrown among themselves like a hot pie. We agreed to meet half an hour before we left for Malfoy Manor and even discussed the outfits. This is a standard topic for those who attend the event together, and it will help to mislead wizards, buying time. And so, I moved by the porte-cochere to Delphine's house in the forest. Following the text of the note, I boldly opened the door, stepping over the threshold. In the central hall of the house, as always, peace reigned. Dim lamps in the corners, a table with chairs and sofas in the center, bizarre shadows from the crackling fire in the fireplace dance intricately on the walls and shelves of cabinets. I shook off a non-existent speck of dust from my black robe with my hand with a cane, adjusted the lapel of my black suit, and made sure that none of the silver cufflinks with blood-red inlay were missing, as well as any other similarly styled accessories, and turned around at the sound of footsteps. Delphine came out in a turtleneck evening gown in several shades of green, reminiscent of those in malachite. A few silver accessories with blood-red stones, like mine. Everything is in moderation, everything is neat but expensive, and it shows. Although the outfits were agreed upon in advance, but it's one thing to know and another to see. And now, without any subtext, I got a real aesthetic pleasure watching her restrained movements. I am once again convinced that only with age and experience does a woman acquire some completely mystical ability to charm. At the same time, no bare legs, short skirts, and other vulgarities are needed. Lady Greengrass, I smiled and bowed stiffly. I couldn't even imagine how dazzlingly beautiful you will be this evening. Flatterer, an answering smile appeared on Delphine's face. How was your preparation for the banquet? Fine, fully armed. That's good to hear. The girls should appear in the next few minutes, and from here, we will go by the fireplace to Malfoy Manor. I decided not to sit down. The wait is less than a minute. Interesting. It turns out that I'm unusually worried. Even the thoughts became chopped, short. The flame in the fireplace turned green, and in a brief moment, Daphne in a blue dress and a dark blue robe came out, and Astoria, all in black. Although the black color of the younger girl's clothes turned out to be deceptive, when the bright light fell directly, it shone dark green. As soon as the girls made sure that they passed the fireplace normally and did not need to clean themselves, and the fireplace flame changed to the usual one, they noticed me and were extremely surprised. It seems that Lady Greengrass did not inform the girls about her +1 identity. Daphne, Astoria, I nodded with a polite smile on my face, and if Daphne was tempted to turn away, turning up her nose, then Astoria gave the usual curtsy. We leave in. Delphine conjured a tempest with her wand. 3 minutes and 25 seconds. Chapter 311. Delphine walked over to the fireplace and ran her hand over certain bricks, triggering a rather interesting mechanism. The fireplace increased in size. In one of the books, I had read about the collective movement in the Flow network, but I was too used to seeing this very movement performed by only one wizard. We stood in silence, waiting for the right time. 30 seconds before dispatch, Delphine tossed a handful of Flow powder into the fireplace, the coaster for which stood at a safe distance from the fire, and the flames turned green, signaling that we could go inside. Daphne and Astoria were the first to go in, and so they would be at our backs. We went in next. Malfoy Manor, Delphine said 5 seconds before the correct time and threw another handful of powder into the flames underfoot. We were literally sucked in and dragged along the green spatial corridor, mercilessly twisting. Other corridors stretched in different directions from it. Still, the cruel whirling in front of my eyes made it impossible to see anything until Rowena decided to let the signals from the senses pass through herself, playing the role of a stabilizer. I never thought that it was possible so cleverly to send all physiology to hell and, on one will, conduct signals along other nerve connections. That's magic, my boy. Arg. Magic was pulling us along one particular route in this spatial green corridor that looked more like a pipe, but it seemed as if just one small volitional effort and I could jump into an entirely different stream. However, one should not take traveling through the Flow network lightly. Such a maneuver with a change of address in flight can indeed be performed, only it is dangerous, and you can be left without an arm or a leg, sending that to someone in the fireplace. Rowena, can you hide in the shadow of Delphine and the girls? Absolutely. Do you want to be always up to date? Yes. All my thoughts about going through the Flow network and a mental conversation with Rowena did not take even a couple of seconds, and now there was a feeling of leaving the fireplace soon. A small effort of will, an attempt to make a step. We emerged in a large and spacious hall with high ceilings and walls of massive stone blocks the color of grey granite. Everything was elaborately decorated. There was expensive carved furniture against the walls, a couple of large paintings of landscapes hung, and the tall windows in the wall opposite were hung with massive curtains. As I stepped onto the carpet that covered most of the floor, I met my eyes with Draco in a black tailcoat and robe. Beside him stood Narcissa, in a dark dress with beige embroidery of plant motifs and a tall hairdo of blonde hair. Of course, I went out at the same time as Lady Greengrass, and we took a step forward to meet the house owners, and Daphne and Astoria came out behind us almost instantly. I was pleased with Draco's inability to take surprises with fortitude, and therefore his surprised face. Out of the corner of his eye, he immediately assessed the situation. Apparently, in this hall, they only meet guests who arrive according to the schedule and then escort them to another, behind one of the doors, either to the left or to the right. Most likely to the right, because that's where some man in his 30s was standing, with his back against the wall, and Delphine's appearance in my company clearly didn't make him happy. Lord Malfoy, I decided to match Lucius' intonation perfectly. Please accept my congratulations. The duties of the head of the house are a heavy burden, and I hope you will bear it with honor. Draco huffed, smirking. Don't doubt it, Knight. Lady Malfoy, you are unfailingly beautiful. Thank you, Mr. Knight. The standard greeting lines went on for another dozen or 2 seconds between all of us, and then Draco and Narcissa led us into another hall, just as I thought, to the right door. The second hall, where those who had already arrived were located, and more characters would certainly appear, was, in principle, similar to the previous one, except that it was longer and was clearly meant as a ballroom. There were tables and buffets and things like that here and there, but judging by the arrangement, there was no dancing involved, but that's obvious, it wasn't a ball. The lighting was good, and there were 2 big chandeliers under the ceiling, but towards the walls where there were tables with sofas and armchairs, the light was dimmed a little, giving the illusion of a more private space. There were quite a few wizards and witches of various ages, about 40 in number, but only a few of the fairer sex could boast of the wealth of color in their clothing. The men preferred classic black or navy blue. Chapter 312. As soon as we entered the hall, everyone paid attention to us. Someone turned around, and someone only glanced at us, continuing to talk quietly in their own interest groups. Draco and Narcissa went to meet other guests, and we went around the hall, for decency requires us to say hello and talk to almost everyone, except for the obviously busy ones who are sitting at the tables. Not far away, I noticed a small group of guys from Hogwarts, from which Nott and Zob and I split off. They moved in our direction, and as soon as we crossed paths, they immediately gave polite greetings, and the guys invited Daphne and Astoria to join their company. In general, the girls left, giving more freedom of maneuver. In short, the first, perhaps, an hour of wandering with a Delphine on the arm around the hall can be described in a few sentences. Internally, I was tense outside. I naturally kept myself moderately important, moderately restrained, moderately. Everything is in moderation. We approached various wizards. Delphine introduced me to them and them to me. Stock phrases, polite interest, but the glances. The glances, though not obvious, said much more than the words. Despite my similarity to Narcissa, it was unclear what was seen in me, and many were not satisfied with my presence here. Some people tried to crush me with authority or put pressure on me with their arrogance, but you can't break me like that. I found it amusing that among all these wizards were those who had escaped from Azkaban. I recognized Dolohov, the black-haired wizard with the slightly crooked face, and Jugsun, the big, fat man with his hair in a ponytail at the back of his head, who looked at everyone with the look of a psychopath. I hate such a look, abrupt movements. Suddenness man, he's genuinely amused by a harmless joke 1 minute, the next, he could throw an Avada at you with anger in his eyes. The Lestranges, both of them were here, chatting quietly with someone at the table. When we had finished our rounds, Delphine and I walked over to one of the empty buffet tables. We took some snacks, imperceptibly checked them with magic without a wand for the presence of various interesting impurities. There were none. Somehow even mundane, I remarked, examining the hall and the wizards in it. You didn't think we'd be attacked right away, did you? Smiled Delphine. Wouldn't that have been easy? Solved all the questions right away and went home. This way, It's a wait. I hate waiting. On the other hand, Delphine took a glass of white wine and, after testing it with magic, took a small sip. There's a lot to see and hear. Well, yes, I nodded. I've heard various rumors and assumptions about us 100 times already. Just as I thought, a lot of people are confused. Continuing to observe the situation, I noticed that the young people gradually withdrew to another hall. Don't worry. I'm recording everything here. They are sitting on the sofas and talk about you. Everyone is at a loss. It's lovely when there is such a unique opportunity to spy. After all, transfiguration is power. Draco is looking forward to the Dark Lord's visit, and in his opinion, he will put you in your place. Lovely. While Rowena was giving her report on the situation among the youth, a trio of wizards moved in my and Delphine's direction. Lady Greengrass noticed it, too, and a dozen other wizards were clearly casting glances from us to them. Jugsun in the middle, Delphine whispered. Roll, who's blonde, and the other one with the short black hair is Caro. We haven't spoken to them, and I wonder what they're up to. Ah, Delphine. Smiled Jugsun cheerfully, taking the lead in the conversation. It's been a long time since we've seen each other. 14 years. And you're still as good as ever. Herbert, smiled the woman sternly, politely. The trio of wizards looked me over a little scornfully, but obviously, they showed exactly what they wanted to show. Go, boy, take a walk with the other children, Jugsun waved me off like a fly. Adults need to talk. I have nothing to hide from my apprentice, Delphine did not let me put in a word. Apprentice, smirked Caro. Did you really trade my invitation for the company of this? Caro grimaced, trying to find the words. Well, I see. Provocation. Let's fall for it. Watch your mouth, I smirked, amicus Caro. As you know, a tongue without bones is often the cause of premature death. Threatening me, an adult wizard. Caro's face took on a very stern look that looked rather intimidating on his slightly elongated pointed face. Oh! Came a voice from the side, and out of the corner of my eye, I noticed another wizard with a grey beard and grey in his hair, William Goyle, the current head of the house. Isn't that the guy who was at the cemetery back then? Goyle looked at me intently, his eyes boring into me. We got in a lot of trouble later. A brat like that. It's funny to hear this from the mouth of a wizard, whom I am both taller and, perhaps, wider in the shoulders. Last warning, amicus, I called his name deliberately. Watch your mouth. Or what? Caro stepped close. Are you gonna wag your finger at me? I'd like to see you try. Chapter 313. Jugsun threw up his hands. Ah, indeed. I remember young Lord Malfoy imagining with great enthusiasm how he would watch the shame or torment of a certain Max Knight. Why don't you, amicus, provide something like this? Without waiting for our answer, Jugsun turned to the wizards in the hall. Duel. Ladies and gentlemen. Let's have some fun. It was worth noting that everything was going off etiquette, and the pretense of what was going on was obvious. The wizards took the news extremely positively, and in a record 10 seconds, they dispersed to two opposite sides of the room, creating a kind of corridor. Max, Delphine looked at me, but I just blinked, saying, it's okay. Amicus and I stepped out into the middle of the makeshift corridor, and the wizards took out their wands and created a film of protection that would prevent a stray hit on them. Terms? I asked, looking at Amicus. Up to the point of being unable to fight, surrendering, or losing the wand. Let's see if you're worth anything or if you're just throwing words to the wind. I reduced the cane and put it in a special pocket of my vest. Like Amicus, I pulled my wand out of its holster, and we turned away from each other, taking 10 steps apart. Turn, bow. We start as soon as the coin touches the floor. Amicus pulled out a galleon and, without waiting for my approval, simply dropped it, pointing his wand at me. Some kind of potion is being sprayed over there. Where exactly? Around Delphine. I guess she didn't notice. Oh, no, she did. My perception was at maximum, and I had already created as many as 4 outlines of different protective spells at the tip of my wand to make sure I didn't miscalculate. However, Amicus lazily launched a simple reducto at me, from which I just dodged sideways. You'll have to play with him a little. The villains were convinced that the potion vapors worked. Delphine will probably try to find out more specifics about what's going on. I responded to Amicus with the same reducto and even cast a spell to assure the wizard of his superiority. So we began lazily exchanging the usual spells to the quiet laughter of those around us. By the way, the Slytherin kids also appeared in the hall, led by Draco, who watched the duel with great curiosity and a smirk on his face. A couple of times, Amicus used everyday charms such as tying a tie or a modified tying of shoelaces, and I had to no longer dodge, but catch them on a large hemisphere of Protogo, so as not to show my ability to catch spells and charms on the tip of a wand ahead of time. The funny thing, and to some extent revealing the idea of Amicus, was that he repeatedly sent gluing spells into my hand with a wand so that I would definitely not drop the wand, thereby ending the duel. Does he want to prolong this and make fun of me, Lady Greengrass, Jugsun? And Roll left the hall and did quite stealthily. When the door to the hall slammed shut behind them, Amicus cast a curious series of everyday charms, covered by a bright ray of Expelliarmus, which he also voiced. However, he kept his movements with his wand, and my eyesight was quite good at adjusting, so I deflected the Expelliarmus and the everyday charms, purposely missing the glue on my arm and Silencio. Feigning my surprise, I looked at Amicus in confusion, which made him chuckle. Now, I'll show you your place, brat. Some wizards grinned quite a bit, especially Draco, and his loyal comrades Crabbe and Goyle distinguished themselves in this regard. How about a little demonstration of dark magic, for example? Crucio. A faint red beam flew from my opponent's wand, which I easily dodged and hit the wall far behind me. Stop jumping! The wizard cried out. Crucio. But I dodged again. Then Amicus got a little angry and started throwing more serious spells at me, trying to either shatter the bones in my legs, or cause painful wounds, or boil the blood in individual organs. Multicolored and sometimes completely invisible rays kept whistling at my temple, but I regularly dodged. Amicus got tired of me constantly dodging everything, so he threw an Incarcerus at me. The construct unfolded on the approach to me, which looked like several intertwined ropes turning into a kind of fishing net. A triumphant smile appeared on Amicus' face, but I just activated the transgression, and the ropes flew through the black smoke. Some wizards began to talk in amazement because this is a rather complex skill from Transfiguration, and not everyone learns this discipline. Basically, you can finish. Your freedom of movement may be required. Our company has retired to a free room, but through the shadow, I feel other actors here and some kind of overwhelming magical effect. It's hard to start building constructs. With strong ones, it will work, but not in the current state of Greengrass. Chapter 314. What are the villains talking about? What about them? Roll, like Caro, didn't like that he wasn't chosen as a chaperone. They've been going on and on about their devious plans. Like, Voldemort ordered to get a signature under a couple of documents from Greengrass, preferably gently, but if necessary, by any means. A couple of schemers from their colleagues have made a simple plan, and we are introducing an element of chaos into it. So they decided to use a mixture of mental potions, and right now, they're bragging that they drank the antidote beforehand, and without it, even the healer will not neutralize the effect. I didn't want to hold back my speed any longer, so I waved my wand at Amicus, sending an overloaded with magic stupefy that exploded into a dozen clots. He managed to put up a shield, stopping more than half of them, but the rest broke through the gap, forcing the wizard to dodge. As the clots flew, I threw Glacio around Amicus, making the floor beneath him incredibly slippery, and launched Conf Ringo at his sides and upward. As soon as Amicus's defenses crumbled, he tried to dodge, taking a step to the side, but slipped. As he fell, he went into transgression, flying upward in black smoke to let the stupefy line of fire under him, but was hit by one of my invisible Conf Ringo beams, and the fiery blast tossed the wounded wizard out of transgression. Amicus rolled on the floor, tumbling randomly, and froze unconscious only against the wall, his face pressed against it. With a simple effort of magic, I dispelled the Silencio and the glue spell on my arm, placing my wand in the holster on my forearm and pulling out my cane. Nice, I smiled at the crowd. But boring. I guess the winner is obvious. Interestingly, no one was in a hurry to help Amicus. The wizards sighed and removed the shield film between us, began to disperse to their companies, actively discussing what they saw. Draco sulked angrily and turned on his heel, quickly strode towards one of the doors, away from the hall. A group of Slytherins followed him. How's Delphine doing? It's hard to say. Someone else's magical influence, psychological pressure, the gradually increasing effect of the potion. An ordinary lady from a wealthy family would be unsettled by this. The Delphine will smash them at one physical acceleration because this effect prevents them too from casting spells. By the way, did you know that she has 6 throwing knives hidden in her dress and 2 long stilettos in a tiny scabbard with an expanded space? How would I know that I haven't rummaged through her dress? What kind of potion at least, approximately? Some kind of mixture that should gradually deprive the mind and increase sexual desire. A kind of clumsy amortentia, only, judging by the words of these two, the mental component can specifically drive you crazy. Delphine will neutralize it on her own, and without an antidote, I can feel it, but Jugsun and Roll may try to use force. I suppose Delphine will have to treat them as enemies and kill them to prevent the effect of the potion from reaching the mind. I sat down at one of the empty tables, where the lights were slightly dimmed, and from the outside, only by concentrating on the place could one identify the wizard. But, what's the point? Well, I mean, it's understandable that Delphine is a beautiful woman and all that. According to them, she will either sign the documents and receive an antidote, or the potion will finally begin to act on her, and when she goes crazy, and this couple has enough fun, she will sign anyway, just to continue the fun. The effect is short-lived, but enough for the purposes, and our potion's master promised results. Well, let her cut them. What if something goes wrong? Yes, and not at an official reception to kill them, even if they are notable shit. Okay, I got it. Have they already told everything and who is there? Yes, all. Now they are just pushing psychologically, slipping documents, and instigating a climate of fear, and Delphine drives the available magic through the body, looking for a key to the potion. But who is there besides? I can't say. Someone is in a secret niche in the wall. Oh, it's Snape. He holds a cube in his hands, which puts pressure on the magic around, and aims with a wand at where these two are standing. It looks like he's going to interrupt them if it comes to the body. And that makes sense. He'll keep Voldemort from getting stronger, bring those two down in his eyes, and save the pretty lady by giving her the antidote. And then the beautiful lady can be asked for a favor. For himself, for the headmaster, and for Voldemort, if that's such a multi-step tactic. Unacceptable. Green grass must remain neutral. Well, then act, hero. Rowena's voice had a distinct note of irony. Laying a route through the shadow. Done. Sitting at a table in the hall and no longer looking at the wizards around, I wrapped myself in a shadow and literally fell into it, focusing on the exit point organized by Rowena. Come, kick the shit out of everyone, pick up the Delphine. The plan is as simple as 5 sickles. Chapter 315. Sitting on a couch in a small and cozy room, lit by the soft light of the lamps on the walls, Delphine listened with interest to the Death Eaters sitting across from her. Apparently, they, like many other wizards, had no idea not only of the woman's master's degrees but of their direction. The same Jugsun looks at her as a 20-year-old silly girl with whom he was once somewhat familiar. However, even then, Delphine diligently leaned on the study of magic. Even Henry didn't know about mastery and feared only ancestral knowledge of necromancy. The potion, the vapor of which she managed to miss during the conversation in the hall, took the lion's share of concentration and attention, and if she weakens it, Delphine drove the thoughts of the possible prospect from her mind. She is no longer a young girl, and such an approach to solving the issue will not surprise her. She has heard enough of everything and seen examples. But changing roles from predator to prey, and even happy with her position, it was unacceptable, and the fact that someone decided to pull such a stunt caused her only anger. That was what she was fueling, to keep the potion's effects under control and gradually overcome its effects. Jugsun pushed a stack of documents across the table towards Delphine. Make up your mind. Otherwise. His vulgar gaze ran over the woman's figure. Why drag it out? The blonde-haired Roll jumped up, rubbing his hands. The result will be the same, but at least we'll please ourselves. I'm tired of don't go this way, don't go that way, don't do this, don't do that. Roll was clearly imitating someone. Well, Jugsun, as it seemed to him, pressed with his gaze, and Delphine finally switched her consciousness to a few simple goals: speed up, throw a dagger, take out a stiletto. A plan of action was maturing in her head because it was difficult for both her and these two to apply magic now, but to strengthen herself. Suddenly the shadows across the room twitched once, twice. The only thing those present had time to do was tense up. In a split second, the simple shadows of objects and the shadows of the wizards themselves seemed to explode in black blobs, sprawling across the walls in scary animal images and cartoonish scary faces. Jugsun and Roll jumped up and reached for their wands, as did Delphine herself, but the shadows seemed to gain volume and density, and thick harnesses shot out of them, entwining the Death Eaters. At the same time, some scuffling was heard, and two opposite walls literally exploded, forming niches and scattering dust, stone, and wooden decor elements everywhere. Two wizards fell out of the openings, wrapped in ropes from the shadows. With great difficulty, Delphine restrained herself from making any sudden movements, quickly shifting her gaze from the wizards, and the surge of adrenaline in her blood pushed the potion problem aside for a while. The first wizard to fall out of the breach in the wall was Professor Severus Snape, who was lifted into the air by the harnesses and had his head badly bumped against the floor, and clearly on purpose. The professor lost consciousness. The second wizard, or rather witch, was Bellatrix Lestrange. She looked with horror and fear at the black harnesses of shadows that were all over the room, and she herself was tightly entangled, stripped of her wand, and almost crucified in the air. "No, no, no!" Bella muttered quietly, shaking her head a couple of times, shaking her long, disorderly curls of black hair with one grey strand in it. "It can't be! What the fuck is this?" yelled Jugsun, and he tried to jerk to the side and even managed to conjure fire without his wand, but the harnesses tightened, and there was a multiple crunching of bones. Ah! Shit! There was another crunch, and now Roll was singing along to his comrade, and their scream was full of pain. "Suck it!" Bella exhaled, and the bright ball of lumos lit up above her, quickly extinguished, but nothing changed. How come? Bella looked with her black eyes at Delphine, motionless and cautiously looking around. "Order him to back off." "It's not me." Shadows thickened on one of the walls and began to swell rapidly to form a male figure, and in the next instant, that figure turned into Max, walking into the room and playing with his cane. In the same instant, Bella fell asleep, and the tall, young blonde man approached Delphine. "Did you find out something?" "Yes, and quite a lot." Delphine put her wand away. "Then..." The guy took the contracts from the table and quickly flipped through them all. "I'll fool around a little." Chapter 316. Max turned sharply on his heels, and the black ropes and shadows in the room quickly gathered into a female figure, consisting of impenetrable darkness. This figure quickly caught up with the guy and seemed to want to go through him but just soaked into his equally black suit. Jugsun and Roll, whimpering on the floor, seemed to be dragged by an invisible hand by the collar after the guy. When they disappeared through the door into the corridor, Delphine came to her senses and quickly followed them, at the same time intrigued by both the turn of events and the apprentice's idea. She flattered herself with the hope that this idea would not be too idiotic. They reached the banquet hall, and as soon as Max opened the doors in front of them, the buzz of conversations and light music subsided, and the wizards present turned their attention to them. Hope dies last. If Delphine knew that phrase, the full depth of its meaning would have reached the woman at that very moment. Max sent Jugsun and Roll tumbling across the floor with a gesture of one hand, and they stopped only in the middle of the hall. Their limbs, like their fingers, were unnaturally bent in many places, and it was impossible for the men to roll over from their backs without experiencing incredible pain. Except their mouths opened in a soundless cry. "Has he already applied silencio?" flashed through Delphine's head, and she looked at her apprentice. The wizards in the hall recoiled from the center, freeing up a lot of space, and looked at what was happening with great interest. There were, perhaps, all the invited guests. In the silence, Max strode toward the center of the room with a steady, confident stride, and her girls almost ran toward Delphine, holding up the hem of their dresses, hurrying to ask about the reasons and meaning of what was happening. "Wizards!" Max's loud and confident voice resounded through the hall, and the guy himself spread his arms a little to the sides as if greeting everyone. His steps slowed down. "Brothers, sisters, my friends," He walked slowly around the two silently groaning bodies, addressing everyone around him. Today, we are gathered here. Max looked around at the wizards who did not dare to interrupt because everyone can speak here, and Jugsun and Roll are not weak wizards, and now they are lying around. To express our hopes and support young Draco Malfoy as he embarks on the hard and difficult path. The path of the head of the house. The wizards buzzed approvingly, saying, "So it is, how else could it be?" But at this feast, where we wizard brothers and sisters have come to show our unity, these two. Max's scornful gaze fell on Jugsun and Roll, lying underfoot. Decided to destroy my master's family and its centuries-old history in the most filthy and vile ways. Here. Max threw the contracts into the air with a gesture, and they flew to the sides, dividing into copies, multiplying, and smoothly falling into the hands of other wizards, who involuntarily began to read the lines, some with horror, and some with a sad grin. "I'll tell you without hiding it," Max's confident voice filled the hall again. "I, being a pure-blood wizard far from the first generation, spent 11 years among the Muggles, lay no magic." The wizards in the hall muttered indignantly, and every now and then, you could hear questions how so and all that sort of thing. "When you look into their society, you see intrigue," he continued, and the murmurs subsided. "Envy, malice, hatred. They happily go in for deception, blackmail, and murder. And for what?" Max looked at the wizards with a question, and from the crowd, shouts could be heard now and then saying, "Because they're filthy animals." Or other content. Delphine flinched when she felt the presence of someone behind her. When she turned around, she saw Bella, wrapped in a hooded black robe, watching Max with a look of surprise. For a little more good, for pleasure, for power and money. The more they achieve, the more they want. They go over the heads of their own relatives, and it's not worth talking about people who are strangers to them. They take away everything and everyone for themselves. They are full of arrogance, lust for power, barbarism. Chapter 317. Many of the wizards nodded in agreement and showed their approval. "I have known and remembered my origins since childhood." Max put his hand to his heart. "I was looking forward to coming back here. And here I am. For the 5th year, I have been learning all the secrets and nuances of life in the world of magic. But the longer I live here, the more I see." The wizards froze in anticipation of the end of the line, and Max's hand, which he held at his heart, clenched into a fist. "My heart bleeds," the guy said with feeling. "What's the difference, my friends? The fact that we tie our shoelaces with magic and Muggles, with their hands. We, wizards, in whose hands are the keys to the universe. We, who are able to provide ourselves with all the conceivable benefits of the world with a wave of our hand. We, who are able to light." Max stretched out his hand in front of him, palm up, and a real miniature sun was created above it, repeating its color, texture, and spots, enveloping the hall with a wave of heat, and the next moment the guy clenched his fist, making the ball disappear and extinguish the stars. "Why do I see exactly the same thing here in the wizarding world as I see among the Muggles?" Max looked around at the wizards but found no answer. "Why are we ready to tear each other's throats, kill our sisters and brothers, deprive them of everything, destroy their families for what? For the sake of what we can achieve ourselves, for the sake of influence, or maybe?" A handful of galleons appeared in the guy's hand. "For the goblin gold. We, representatives of the families in whose veins flows the blood of dozens of generations of wizards. Those who are supposed to be the guiding star for young families, the standard and role model. We destroy each other, reducing our families to ashes in the wind. Is this the goal of pure-blood wizards? Is this what you will pass on to your children? The rebel and ruins of the world. Our ancestors, without sparing themselves, discovered the secrets of magic, delving into the secrets of the universe, laying their heads on the altar of knowledge of magic. They discovered the unknown and the new, so that children would pick up their banners and carry them on, through the ages. To live in a world where there will be no need and no place for cruelty and violence. So that honor, pride, and dignity never become an empty sound. Loyalty to the word and deed was as before, at the basis of actions, and each new generation brought something new and incredible. To Jers per, these words are engraved on my family's coat of arms. What do you carry? What did your ancestors bequeath to you?" The brief pause in Max's speech was interrupted by another hum of whispering, and some wizards seemed to feel the hands of their ancestors on their shoulders, which stood in a huge line behind them. They straightened up, and in the eyes of many, Delphine saw not an eternal mask of contempt but pride, and with a smile, she noticed how a herd of goosebumps ran through her own body. Max squeezed the galleons in his hand, and they crumbled into gold dust, disappearing. Delphine realized with some inner instinct that the ending of this speech might not be so significant and, even more so, harmful. She moved confidently toward Max, and placing her hand gently on his elbow, she whispered almost inaudibly, "Don't go on. That's enough." The boy looked at her intently with blue eyes and nodded. "Time to go," she whispered again, and Max shifted his gaze to the wizards. "Urgent matters require attention, and therefore we are leaving. I hope that no troubles will befall the House of Malfoy under the leadership of the young head." Max and Delphine headed through the parting crowd to the exit of the hall, and Daphne and Astoria quickly caught up with them, stepping behind them. When they disappeared into the fireplace room, the crowd of wizards became animated again, starting to discuss a new topic. Still, only a few noticed Voldemort sitting at one of the tables in the shadows in the company of two wizards. But even so, their faces were impossible to make out and remember, and as soon as you took your eyes off them, you immediately forgot what you had seen so interesting a second ago. Did you see anything there at all? Chapter 318. Soft yellow light from the main hall of Lady Greengrass Countryside House met us with calmness, so inner tension from appointment in Malfoy's manor quickly started to fade away. Delphine right away sent girls with a fireplace to their family house and went to her room after crumbled goodbye. I shrugged, realizing the reasons for such a hurry. After checking if the fireplace was closed, I left the house in Opérat de Grimmauld Place. Before having a nice shower, I told the portrait of Lady Walburga about the events at the appointment, letting her process the information. Then I went to the room given to me. Even in my previous visits, when I didn't have access to almost anything, I had a nice, but small bright room with a huge comfortable bed and other necessary furniture. Now the room was still mine, despite the fact that I could get any appartement I wanted. While laying in bed, I was thinking of things. Different things. Most of them were about the feigned argument, but I couldn't leave it like that. First of all, what could I say about Amicus Caro as a wizard, a vicious, arrogant middle peasant from an ancient pure-blood family? His real potential remained unknown, but towards the end he did quite well in dodging my spells. Definitely, at the beginning he restrained himself, and he definitely didn't use lethal spells, although he could. I read such moments in his eyes when he seemed to be going against his habits. However, on the other hand, various bone-crushing and blood-boiling curses can also kill you. Everything that one needs is a desire. This topic is so slippery, because you can kill with anything, if you have such desire. In general, with the beginning of the wizard's self-isolation and the widespread use of duels, the number of uniquely lethal and irreversibly traumatic combat spells began to fall. Probably that's why Avada Kedavra now terrifies and thrills wizards. After all, they don't often see this spell even in books. Yes, there are a lot of traumatic ones, but their consequences can be cured whenever necessary in a good case, and only with emergency assistance in especially severe ones. Really killing, focused specifically on killing one or many, such spells are very old and not accessible to everyone. And they are difficult, especially those that don't require any kind of emotions. However, I can imagine a lot of various spells that resemble a physical effect and are fatal by its use. But I have this vision, and maybe those, who are knowledgeable and versed in science and technology of ordinary people, who study and substantiate natural processes, have it as well. Even take a banal laser. Although, I got too excited. I don't know how many years has theoretical substantiation, but the practical obtaining of a laser became possible about 40 years ago. What to say about wizards? It's unlikely that they, in principle, realize not only the application area of the laser, but also the very fact and the meaning of the existence of narrowly directed, coherent, monochromatic, polarized radiation. This thought gave rise to a chain of completely different assumptions and theories in my head, which led me to an interesting conclusion: I don't want to sleep. But, aside from jokes, tossing and turning in bed, I was able to formulate an elusive thought about the reasons for such an unusualness of spells and enchantments, their fabulousness, visual performance, which together give the magic a flair of mysticism and miracle. Wizards have never particularly observed or have known the world. Of all the spells and rituals I know about, those that to one degree or another reproduce some natural phenomena or other effects can be counted on the fingers of one hand. Everything else is a product of a sick fantasy and the wizard's wishes, in ancient times realized through madness and experiments, and in the last hundreds of years calculated through arithmancy and so on. What does this knowledge give me who'd have known? On the one hand, you can create unique spell complexes by emulating physical phenomena, and at the same time, this will definitely be my author's innovation. On the other hand, I noticed long ago that the more abstract the spell is, the less understanding of the nature of the process that it reproduces is invested in it, the more magic the spell perceives. It's logical to assume that a spell, composed on the basis of understanding the processes, their calculations, and translation into a magical model, can significantly reduce the cost of magic, but make it more complex. However, for those who have ideal memory, sensitivity to magic and control of consciousness, it won't be a problem to reproduce the spell a couple of times as it should be, and then only feed the construct with magic. Isn't it a common goal and wizard's meaning of life to develop such skills? Chapter 319. The morning began suddenly. It seemed like I was thinking about interesting things, making not less interesting conclusions, and at the same time, I blinked, and it's dawning outside the window. As always, I went for a jog at the beginning of the day, but for physical training, I had to return to Grimmauld Place. There, in the training hall, I transfigured the materials I already had around the house into the equipment and horizontal bars I needed. In all, I killed 2 birds with 1 stone. Besides physical training, I used transfiguration in my everyday life to bring its use to automatism. The next day went according to the schedule. Training by the varied program that Delphine gave me, and that was disassembled up and down according to different commissions for the title of Master. This is a transfiguration of high complexity from everything to everything. I nullified the strength from hemomancy and even weakened myself. Trained in a pure, so to speak, form. When my brains were already melting from tension, and the wand, trembling, strove to fall out of my tired hands, I switched to training with hemomancy. So far, it was difficult to decide on any special training because this energy has 2 states, immaterial and materialized. In the second case, everything is simple pseudo-blood, which can act on matter, cut, crush, prick, and whatever. In the same state, the energy of hemomancy can be used as a shield against material and energetic influences. In an immaterial state, the energy of hemomancy can still be used as a shield, but only from other energies, and even then not on a full scale. The same light, ultraviolet, and other wavelengths pass, but magic structures can get stuck or scattered. You can also mix energy with a magical construct, giving it some properties of this energy. But I already knew that, and now I try different spells more meaningfully. Protego, with all its modifications, becomes noticeably stronger, although the shield film acquires a slight reddish tint. Spells of at least some kind of combat orientation acquire great penetrating power against shields but do not change other properties. The enchantment applied to the item lasts a little longer, as well as the runes powered with an admixture of this energy. I haven't experimented with potions because I don't really understand how they are brewed without this energy. In general, the days went by in training. Closer to the 20th, I came by to the Order's headquarters and got a mirror to communicate with Tonks. There was nothing else for me to do there, and the constantly scurrying back and forth Potter and the multitude of Weasleys, bursting with righteous anger for not being devoted to anything, gave me a headache. At the end of August, I started to correspond more often with Lady Greengrass. She was actively engaged in her family's affairs and planned to finish the main and most time-consuming work by the beginning of the school year, whatever she was doing there. Because of this, we could not find time for personal meetings, and I just received manuscripts copied by magic, book chapters, or entire books. What should I do? I studied and practiced. I was advised to start studying healing magic in my last August letter, but I had to practice transfiguration because I still suck at it. And for me, healing magic starts with banal muggle medical disciplines about the structure and functioning of the human body, anatomy, biology, histology, normal and pathological physiology. Various sections of chemistry and other disciplines have not yet found application in healing magic and therefore are not recommended. I had to look for textbooks by myself because Lady Greengrass complained that she was not well versed in the ordinary world, and that's me who had to be on the top and find the most detailed literature. Hermione wrote at the very end of August, on the 30th. It turns out that her parents, with unprecedented enthusiasm, involved the girl in the move while constantly going on all sorts of trips to France, to its magical quarters, and even dragged her off on an excursion to Beaux Batons. Apparently, Hermione steady holds the defense but will arrive exactly at the departure to Hogwarts. It's a pity a bit. Until the very 1st of September, I trained in magic and looked for the ideal proportions of admixture of hemomancy in spells to increase their penetrating or defensive properties. From the purchased books I learned the ministerial program, rather strange, theoretical, but really correct and relevant, and practical, but that was from other textbooks. In general, as always, I was preparing for something incomprehensible without sparing myself. Chapter 320. On the morning of the 1st of September, I packed necessary things, underwear, socks, and other stuff, put on a new school uniform that consists of the same dark grey trousers, shirt, jumper, and a tie. After making myself invisible to muggles, I dropped a bag behind my shoulder and operated to King's Cross Station. Such a strange feeling. John always gave me a ride before, but now. Pirate unexpectedly landed on my shoulder, and I had to stretch my arm, so this awkward but big owl could sit on my elbow bend. It seemed like muggles didn't notice him, but it could happen. Some magical animals, just like wizards, sometimes acquire extraordinary abilities, although this mechanism has not yet been identified. It's funny how the pirate let the knights see him. What did you come for such a calm owl? Do you want to go to Hogwarts with me? Didn't like the idea of going to America. Ho ho. The owl stared at me with one eye, leaning in my direction. He clearly agreed with my thoughts. Then off you go. You'll settle down there in the Hogwarts soloy. Ho ho ho. The owl was pleased, he flew off of my hand, and I couldn't see him anymore in the blueness of the morning sky. Grinning after the bird, I went to platform 9 3/4. Ordinary people were still scurrying around, but what amused me was a bunch of extremely suspicious and completely, well, not at all prominent wizards, who almost dashed to the wall between the 9th and 10th platforms, simultaneously turning circles around this place. Of course, the center of this flickering was Potter and the big black dog, and in some distance, you could see the worried Mrs. Weasley. A strange, slightly stooped, and plump station employee was pushing in front of him a freight cart full of things and suitcases, and even from under a low cap pulled down, an artificial eye in a copper-colored frame could be seen. If you take a closer look, you can see a few more people standing out from the general crowd. I have never understood this, and once again, I am surprised that wizards have just an innumerable amount of clothes, comparable in style and purpose with the muggles' clothes. But as soon as the clothes of ordinary people fall into their hands, the wizards immediately try to find the most extraordinary use for it, which is completely contrary to the real one. In general, the gaze involuntarily catches the wizards, although they looked ordinary but a bit eccentric. I decided not to show my, of course, terrible sense of humor. Instead, I just walked through the crowd and, without hiding, got through the wall to the magical part of the station. It was the same bright platform, the same bright colors, fussy children and teenagers, joyful parents who accompanied their children to school, the same scarlet train with a locomotive that made a couple of beeps. Hermione was standing near one of the passenger carriages in the school uniform. She already put on a robe. Next to her was a huge travel suitcase with a handle and on wheels. The naked eye could see a couple of rune chains along the edge of the lid. I managed to approach quite unnoticed, but when I got almost close, Hermione turned sharply in my direction and recognized me, smiled happily, immediately rushed to hug me. Max. She almost hung on my neck. I missed you so much. Me too, my own. I hugged her as well. Let's take a compartment. Hermione grabbed her suitcase by the handle and literally flew into the carriage. We found the compartment immediately. Many students so far preferred to communicate outside the train. Quickly placing our luggage under the seats, we sat down by the old habit, opposite each other. You cannot even imagine. Hermione's face expressed both joy and resentment. My parents started a real campaign to change my priorities. Not a second of rest, not a moment when it was possible to get distracted from reality. By hook or by crook, they wanted me to stay in France and enter the Beaux Batons. It looks like they failed. Of course, the girl nodded confidently, and a couple of unruly strands strayed out from behind her ear. Her hairstyle is simple now, Her hair is long, but everything is neatly gathered and pinned up. Nevertheless, this very hair still tended to make a mess on her head. Judging by your late arrival, they held out to the last. And not only that, Hermione smiled weakly. Parents sold all the property here, and in fact, I had nowhere to return. That's it. I have all my things in this suitcase. Hermione shrugged. You could have written to me. I definitely have a place to live. Already 2 houses. You didn't say. You didn't ask. Chapter 321. Problem. Hermione thought about it. The silence about the situation led to the fact that we could not meet in the summer, because I was afraid that I would have nowhere to live. But I didn't share my fears. And you didn't know that I had such a problem, so you didn't inform me about the possibility of inviting me to your house. Conclusions. If there is a problem you need to tell, I shrugged. Well noticed. So. In addition to the fact that my parents tried by hook or by crook to lure me to France for permanent residence, which led to the fact that I did not complete some of my homework. In addition, I have nowhere to live after the school year, if not to fly to France, of course. Then I have no more difficulties. For now. Thinking, I rubbed my chin. A huge amount of material for theoretical study, loads of practice. I recently was at the appointment in Malfoy Manor, beat up some Death Eater, helped the mentor solve a problem, threw Snape into the wall, made a speech in front of radicals, and even left unscathed. Potentially got ill-wishers and just interested people. The year can be interesting. Hermione looked at me somewhat shocked, but she shook her head with a grin after a couple of seconds. A busy summer. By the way, have you read The Prophet? Which one? Wait a second. Hermione took a thin rectangular bag from under her robes and pulled out a notebook much larger than the bag. Here you go. I picked up a notebook with a small animated cat in the corner. Pages 12 to 19. There are newspaper clippings. Once I got to the right pages, I delved into reading the headings and content of the clippings. Their essence was simple: Dumbledore and Potter are 2 crazy swindlers. This topic was promoted with incredible power and persistence of the publishing house. What everyone saw at the tournament seemed nothing more than an organized performance to test the fortitude of the one who passed. Like a test. I already knew about such an official position of the ministry, but the fact that it, through the Prophet, is trying to discredit Dumbledore and Potter, and it is trying hard, not sparing itself. This is news to me. Let's say, after reading it, I returned the notebook to Hermione. You didn't say, but Minister Fudge personally handed you half of the winnings. Then, in the hospital wing. Yes, he did. Well. Hermione was clearly spinning a thought in her head. Did he say anything? As I recall, Fudge promised to speak with Dumbledore about Hogwarts affairs. Oh. It's all very suspicious. When the train moved off, Hermione and I began to do our homework. I didn't do anything at all over the summer, I forgot. I was running around. Knowledge and experience in magic made it possible to relatively quickly make notes on parchments and quite clearly reveal the assigned topics and subjects. We haven't forgotten about Flitwick's project, which we will have to return to in this academic year. During the trip, nothing special happened, except for the fact that Hermione flashed the prefect's badge. You didn't tell me about it. I nodded at this accessory, which was not fixed on the robe, but calmly laid in one of the envelopes that the girl put on the table, transfigured in the middle of the compartment. Oh, this Hermione took the badge with the word prefect in the background of the house's coat of arms. I'll refuse as soon as I see Professor McGonagall. What if she doesn't give you permission? I'll ignore, Hermione shrugged. I don't think we'll have time for all this farce. Frankly speaking, I thought that if you get such an opportunity, you will agree. Absolutely a waste of time. Of course, helping others is a good thing. But it makes sense only when they come for help by themselves. If someone needs help, they will contact me without the prefect's badge on my robe. Seems logical. Chapter 322. The time passed unnoticed while doing homework and talking about summer. The weather outside the train window wasn't constant, and by the end of the trip, when it was getting dark, rare drops of rain began covering the windows, but in Hogsmeade, the weather again became cloudless, albeit dark. The moonless sky didn't please us at all with lighting, and the already familiar picture was broken by a woman with a flashlight who met the first years instead of Hagrid. Wilhelmina Grubbly Plank, if my memory serves me right. An elderly woman, but still a cheerful, lively, and strict lady. However, I don't really know her because I don't attend care of magical creatures. Senior courses went to the carriages, and Hermione and I had the opportunity to see an amazing picture Potter was trying to prove to Ron that the carriages were harnessed, in his words, with strange, scary horses. Hermione shook her head dejectedly. He goes to care of magical creatures, reads books, but doesn't know about thestrals. I don't remember Hermione saying last year that she can see them. But I do remember how she looked at thestrals. Quickly took seats in the same carriage with Lavender, Parvati, and Seamus. We peacefully and calmly rolled to Hogwarts while talking about all sorts of stuff, the summer, who had been where, and what we had seen. Lavender, Hermione suddenly looked at the blonde seriously. Would you like to be a prefect? Oh, of course. Brown almost jumped in place, beaming. There is so much you can do. True, it is also much you have to. But, it's great. And if you show yourself well, then you can get a good position in the ministry. Excellent. Hermione pulled out the prefect's badge in one motion. I don't want to. Let's go to Professor McGonagall today and explain the situation. Oh. But. Lavender looked at each of us somewhat confusedly. We can't do it that way. Lavender thought about it for a couple of seconds and then beamed again. Excellent. Let's tell McGonagall. We won't be afraid of difficulties. Having reached the castle, we joined the general stream of students and went to the Great Hall to await sorting and a feast. As always, there were many burning candles in the air above the tables, and the illusion of the night sky above Hogwarts flaunted on the ceiling. As soon as we sat down at the tables, a sluggish, but at the same time, paradoxically lively conversation began about whether Potter was lying or not. What do you think? Seamus turned to me. My mom believes in newspaper articles. I also believe, but I saw with my own eyes what was happening there. The question asked by Seamus attracted the eyes of others to me. I'll say so, I looked at everyone. No one introduced himself to me. No one spoke to me. An avada was thrown at me. The kids shuddered. But after being protected by the transfiguration, I lost consciousness. When I woke up, I saw how Potter entered into a magical confrontation with some fearful man, and around wizards in the clothes of Death Eaters. Then you saw everything. Based on those events, I can neither confirm nor deny the information about the rebirth of you-know-who. Well, Seamus nodded with a serious face and looked at Dean. I thought so. That's not all. The guys around just wanted to turn away, returning to their conversations but were forced to listen again. During the summer I visited many places, saw many people. I cannot go into details, but among those acquitted in the past and other supporters of the policy of the Dark Lord, all kinds of radicals, and so on, there is accurate and reliable information that he has returned. The Death Eaters have marks on their left hand. They noticed long ago that the stronger the Dark Lord, the brighter the mark. Now it is as bright as it was during his lifetime. But this is all circumstantial evidence. And what to do? Dean asked, clearly concerned. Working theory: the Dark Lord has been reborn. We will prepare for the worst, and if this turns out to be not true, we will be very happy. But this is nonsense. Lavender wanted to be indignant, but all conversations were interrupted by McGonagall, who entered the hall. She was followed by first years in single file, frightened, worried, confused, and cheerful at the same time. An amazing combination of emotions for poor children. The Hat sang its song for a long time this year. Its message was clear: there is a threat above us, get up, great country. I was frankly too lazy to look for a deeper meaning. Of course, the Hat's song was followed by the sorting of first years, and then Dumbledore made a speech after rising from his massive headmaster's chair. Our newcomers, the headmaster spoke loudly, beaming with a smile and opening his arms wide, welcome. To our old guard, welcome back to the nest. The time will come for speeches, but now is the time for something else. Enjoy your dinner. The headmaster's short speech drew laughter and approving applause, and he sat down neatly and slung his long beard over his shoulder to keep it out of the plate. Food immediately appeared on all tables in great abundance and variety: meat, pies, vegetable dishes, bread, sauces, and jugs of juices. Chapter 323. The number of conversations suddenly decreased, and the characteristic sound of cutlery meeting dishes could be heard from all sides. I preferred to pay attention to food and not others. However, Ron often attracted the attention of others by talking with his mouth full and then inadvertently scattering crumbs of this very food around him. Or, together with Potter, he will offend our ghost, nearly headless Nick. After dinner, the headmaster reminded everyone again that the Forbidden Forest wasn't called that for fun, and you can get acquainted with the list of forbidden things from Mr. Filch. In addition, the headmaster announced the changes in the teaching staff. Wilhelmina Grubbly Plank will teach the care of magical creatures, and Dolores Umbridge will teach Dada. It was a short, plump lady with curly brown curls on her head and in a surprisingly pink business skirt suit. It was this lady who took advantage of the pause in the headmaster's speech and got up from the table and decided to say a word. "Thank you, headmaster," said Umbridge, smiling coyly, in her high, girlish voice with a gasp, for the kind words of greeting. She left the table and began to walk slowly along the small podium on which the table itself and the headmaster's throne were located. "It's nice, I'll tell you, to be back at Hogwarts. To see so many happy little faces turned to me. I look forward to meeting each of you and am convinced that we will become very good friends." Gradually, the students began to pay less and less attention to Umbridge's speech, preferring to whisper quietly among themselves. The very same protégé from the ministry didn't seem to notice this, continuing to speak. However, her tone changed, and the words sounded as if she had rehearsed them many times. Having learned to such a state that woke her up at night, she could easily tell everything. The Ministry of Magic has always considered the education of young witches and wizards of vital importance. The rare gifts you were born with can be wasted if not cultivated and honed with careful instruction. The ancient skills that set the magical community apart from all others must be passed down from generation to generation, otherwise, we will lose them forever. To preserve, increase and polish the treasures of magical knowledge accumulated by our ancestors is the primary duty of those who have devoted themselves to the noble cause of teaching. Umbridge nodded respectfully to the other teachers but received no response. Each new headmaster of Hogwarts brought something new to the difficult task of leading this ancient school, and so it should be, because, without progress, there will be stagnation and decay. However, progress for the sake of progress should not be encouraged, for most of our time-tested traditions do not need revision. So, a balance is needed between old and new, between constancy and change, between tradition and innovation. Because some of the changes bring real improvement, while others, over the years, reveal their uselessness. Likewise, some of the old customs should be preserved, while those that have become obsolete should be abandoned. Let's take a step into a new era, the era of openness, efficiency, and responsibility. Preserving what deserves to be preserved, perfecting what can be perfected, and eradicating what has no place in our lives. Umbridge returned to her place at the table. Dumbledore clapped. The rest of the teachers followed the headmaster's example, but without a twinkle. As, by the way, the students purely for decency. Dumbledore spoke up again, talking about some of the organizational nuances. Interesting. Hermione thoughtfully wrapped a lock of hair on her finger. Did you like it? Dean stared at her in surprise. No. But in this speech, Professor Umbridge made it clear that the ministry suddenly had its own vision of how Hogwarts should work. And this vision she will plant no matter what. When it was time to go to the common rooms, it turned out that Ron Weasley was the prefect. However, he actually very quickly got away with Harry, and the little ones were left unattended without any idea what to do. Anyway, they looked at the departed Harry and Ron with a slight fear and relief. Hermione and Lavender set out to storm the McGonagall fortress. Now I have nothing to do anyway, so. First years, slightly increasing the density and volume of magic around me, I looked at the confused first years. Stand in a column by 2. The kids fussed around in a funny way, but there were 9 of them, and one little boy with protruding ears was left behind. Abercrombie, the boy immediately looked at me. You will be the closing one. This is a responsible and important task. The boy nodded vigorously. Excellent. Follow me. I went to the exit from the hall, and the little ones did not hesitate a second, cheerfully, and quickly followed me. Are you the prefect? Quietly asked the girl, obviously walking with her friend in front of everyone. No. Our prefect, Ron Weasley, a friend of Harry Potter, elated with the joy of his post, happily ran away. There are legends that he is not very smart. But, empty talk aside. We left the hall and headed down the corridors to the main tower with moving staircases. Chapter 324. So. I will not tell inspiring but completely empty speeches. I present to your attention Grand Staircase. We were standing on a flight of stairs and, as if by magic, this very moment was chosen by several stairs to start moving, changing their position in space. The kids looked surprised to varying degrees. Many will say that they move freely, but they are not. Their movement obeys a strict scheme, but it is quite difficult to learn, and then also to calculate when, where, and which staircase will move. It is very difficult. This knowledge will come by itself over time. Follow me. We headed up these stairs. On the walls, I continued to speak. You can see a huge number of portraits. You can talk to everyone, but not everyone wants it. After passing one flight of stairs and stepping onto another, I stopped the first years and turned to face them. There is a disappearing step on this staircase. 8th from the bottom, look. I pointed with my wand to the step, but not for witchcraft. There's a red mark in the corner of the step. Our caretaker, a lover of cleanliness, constantly erases it, but some students apply it again. But remember this staircase. Nothing serious will happen, but if you fail, it'll be enough fear for a lifetime. Let's go further. Passing another flight of stairs, we stumbled upon none other than Peeves. A vile arrogant poltergeist in the form of a horribly caricatured complete freak. In the hands, Peeves held balls of dung bombs, flew over us, and laughed disgustingly. Ahaha! First years! Would you like to taste the scent of magic? Peeves threw bombs at us, but with one movement of my wand, I created a powerful translucent dome of protogo. Bombs hit it and exploded, filling everything around with a stinking substance of indeterminate color. Running the free hand along the wand, I transferred the protection recharge to this hand, and with the wand, I created a powerful cleansing spell that destroyed all the obscenity outside the dome and even purified the air. Having condensed and increased the magic volume inside and outside, I forced my eyes to glow dimly blue and looked at Peeves. Heek! The mood of the poltergeist instantly changed its polarity. If you don't leave us alone, I'll dispel you. Got it, not a fool. Peeves abruptly flew away, and after a couple of seconds, we heard his scream, "Night is awesome." The kids looked at me with admiration, and as we moved on, a quiet whisper came to my ears. But my dad can't do that. So this is the champion of the tournament. He bypassed the defense of Dumbledore himself. I will not say that this did not amuse my vanity in any way. Amused? A little. Next, I continued the story. I perfectly understand that you are in the School of Magic, and there are a lot of interesting things. You want to see everything as soon as possible, climb everywhere, explore everything, touch and see. But I recommend that you pay attention to classes, discipline, and appearance for the first 2 weeks. The kids were weakly outraged. Believe me, you will make a good impression on the professors, and this will make your life much easier. By the way, about the professors. Don't be late for potions. I recommend that you study the textbook for the first year in detail. Do it together if it's boring. Professor Snape is a very shitty person and far from the best teacher. He likes to find fault with everything. Do not give him a reason, and do not argue, you will only make it worse. Trust my experience. Is it true, one of the girls asked quite boldly, that our headmaster is crazy? The question caused an amazing mixture of indignation and curiosity among the first years. I'll tell you this. We wizards are all a bit of that. Each in its own way. In general, there are no healthy people, there are under-examined ones. And what about the other professors? Are they crazy? No, the girl looked down. How to behave on other subjects. Just follow the instructions of the professors. And always remember that magic is not only beautiful and wonderful but also dangerous. Chapter 325. We got to the portrait of a fat lady, whom I introduced to everyone, not forgetting to give the password. When we went into the common room, many students didn't even really notice it, but the rest looked with a surprise from me, the leader of the first years, to Ron sitting at the table, who was loudly talking about how it's cool to be a prefect. He was telling this to a despondent Potter, who was staring at the chessboard in front of him with a meaningless gaze. I brought the kids to the center of the common room. Wait here, guys. The first years obediently nodded their heads, and I crept up to Ron like an inaudible shadow. Copying Snape's voice and intonation, I spoke from behind him. Mr. Weasley. Ron jumped but was in no hurry to turn around. I admit that your back of the head is a better interlocutor than yourself. However, unfortunately, I wanted to ask you a couple of questions. Weasley slowly began to turn, and there was a surprise and apprehension on his instantly pale face. But when he saw me, he sighed with relief. Oh. Max. Damn, you scared me. Why do that? The Gryffindors laughed, and Weasley himself smiled. It sounds so similar. Mr. Weasley, I didn't change my tone. Let me ask you, what is on the collar of your robe? Where Ron glanced first at one and then at the other collar. Oh, this is the prefect's badge. Can you imagine I was appointed prefect? I never would have thought. If it was Harry. That's enough already, Potter waved him off. This is not for me. Prefect? I looked more closely at the badge. Well, yes. Please accept my congratulations. But I have another question. Look at the center of the common room. What do you see? Ron glanced behind me. Well, first years. How did they end up here, Mr. Weasley? Please stop doing that, said Ron, and then it hit him. Merlin's beard. I forgot. That's it. Ron, I spoke already normally, in these difficult times for all of us, we cannot afford to be careless and relaxed. Do you know what I mean? You are now the prefect. Do not fail Dumbledore's trust. Damn. Well, Go, greet them, make some speech. Turning around, I made my way to my already traditional seat on the sofa, but before I could reach it, Hermione and Lavender entered the common room. The second one had the prefect's badge pinned to her robe. Hermione hurried to sit next to me on the sofa, and I just noticed Dean, Seamus, and Parvati, sitting at a table next to our sofa and playing cards. Well, I rested my head on the lap of Hermione sitting next to me. I see you were dismissed from the post. It was not easy, and it looked like the professor was a little disappointed in me. She was sure that I was the perfect candidate. They also wanted to appoint you, but the owl came back again and again with the badge, and the professor decided to appoint Ronald. That's good. I don't want to do this every day. We were silent for a while. I guess, Hermione was almost imperceptibly embarrassed. I should apologize. After all, we thought that we could spend at least a couple of weeks of the summer not at school. It's okay, I closed my eyes, parents are more important. By the way, what finally convinced them to let you go? Well, I summoned fiend fire. My eyes opened by themselves from the unexpected news, and I was able to see a really embarrassed Hermione. There's something you're not telling me. Hermione bit her lip, trying to hide her smile. It was in the shape of an otter. You have no idea how terrifyingly comical the swarm of fire otters looked against the background of distorted images of fiend fire. You have some strange idea of comicality. Hermione poked me lightly in the side with her fist. It seems, I couldn't help but smile now. I'm influencing you badly. Who knows? Who knows? Chapter 326. The morning of the first day of school began with exercises and jogging in the thick, wet fog that descended on the outskirts of Hogwarts. The standard procedure, without which I can no longer imagine the beginning of the day, and judging by Hermione running next to me in a different but the same blue tracksuit, I'm not the only one who has brought physical training into my life. After cleaning up, we sat in the common room, checking homework in all subjects just in case. It was still early, and only a few students were hanging around like disheveled somnambulists, sleepily shuffling their feet and rubbing their sleepy faces. A dozen minutes later, the common room began coming to life, and first years gathered in the center in perfectly fitting uniforms and robes. A completely happy Lavender hurried to them and began enthusiastically telling them how everything was great and rosy and that she would accompany them for the first 2 weeks, as it should be. The kids immediately picked up Lavender's cheerful mood and followed her out of the common room. Hermione and I accompanied the procession with the same expressionless glances. Isn't it too early? She asked to nowhere. It's fine. We'll come just in time, I shrugged, and we put all our work in bags with an invisible extension and went after the small ones to the Great Hall. The students who were still far from being fully assembled looked sleepy and tired, but those who were younger were quite cheerful. It seems that many people have decided to throw a party and are now suffering from lack of sleep and possibly from a hangover. While we, as the headmaster said, were eating breakfast with both cheeks, the heads of the houses launched with magic sheets with a schedule on the tables, which multiplied as needed. Some kind of nightmare, complained the dejected Ron, who by some miracle had already found himself at the table with Potter, history, dual potions, divination, and dual defense. All in one day. I wish Fred and George would hurry up with their strike breakfasts. Of course, the twins appeared nearby. One squeezed between Ron and Harry, and the other sat next to us on the other side. What do I hear? Are my ears deceiving me? The first one who sat down with Ron and Harry asked. The prefect of Hogwarts wants to skip classes. Here, look, Ron showed him his schedule, and I glanced at mine. Instead of divination, there were ancient runes. Nothing special. I understand you, brother, the first twin nodded. Well, I can give you a bloody candy for a low price. Why would it suddenly be cheap? Ron asked suspiciously. I bet, I grinned, the guys don't have a neutralizer yet. You're absolutely right, Max, said the twins in unison. I hope. Hermione looked at the twins with a grin, you are not selling unfinished stuff. You think we're stupid or something, the second one replied, but both were affectedly offended. We don't sell. And do not throw. And don't add. Nothing that has not been tested and for which there is no antidote or counterspell. Only for Ronnikins. Purely brotherly. Come on, Ron pouted, I'd better sit in the classroom. You won't last long. The first twin put his arm around Ron's shoulders. You will soon howl from these lessons. You'll beg for it yourself. Ron looked doubtfully at his brother and shrugged off his hand. Why so? In the 5th year, you pass the OWL, explained the second. You will be so burdened that your backs will crack. Yet. The first one rolled his eyes dreamily, not at all offended by Ron, who threw off his hand. Half of ours had problems with nerves before the OWLS. There were tears, tantrums. Patricia Stimpson fainted all the time. One way or another, the second picked up the thought, the 5th year is a nightmare. At least for those who care about exam results. By the way, what are you going to do after school? I don't know, I guess, Ron said slowly. Unless, we all looked at him with great interest. What Potter couldn't stand the silence. Well, it would be nice to be an Auror, Ron remarked casually. That's for sure. Harry immediately confirmed. Ooh. Hermione drawled a little mockingly, grinning. Have you even seen the mandatory grades for O.W.L.S and N.E.W.T.S for admission to the Aurors Academy? No, Ron and Harry shook their heads. Outstanding in Dada, herbology, potions, transfiguration, and charms. A+ will be passed on e-care, runes, or numerology. Or all together. If there are good results in additional subjects, it is allowed to E in 1 or 2 main subjects. By the way, not only the N.E.W.T is taken into account, but also the OWL. Ron scratched his head thoughtfully. It's a problem. Chapter 327. After Ron's phrase, I couldn't help but smile. You just need to learn more, I shrugged. You're learning all the time, Ron replied dejectedly, and Harry nodded in agreement. Well, of course, Hermione grinned again. We have at our disposal some of the most qualified teachers in their field, 7 years of access to the most complete magical library in England and Western Europe, free medical care, food such as is required to fulfill the daily schedule, no matter how difficult it may be. And all this for ridiculous money, and if there are 3 or more children in the family for free. For free in chorus asked all the Weasleys around, among whom at some distance sat Ginny, like many others listening to our conversation. After all, when the older ones approach the younger ones and start a conversation, it always arouses a slight interest. Well, yes, Hermione shrugged. Muggleborns are provided with an interest-free loan in the amount of 80% of the cost of learning for the full program, or a 20% discount on the learning itself. Then I thought about it. I didn't know. Didn't your parents tell you usually, professors or employees of the ministry discuss these points? Most likely, you were paid for in full. The amount is ridiculous. In the ordinary world, just a good school costs the same or more. And how do you know everything? Harry looked from me to Hermione. We read smart books, we answered at the same time and, having exchanged glances, smiled. Behind our backs, the cheerful Lavender enjoyed the role of a kind of Mother Goose and led a bunch of enthusiastic first years back to the tower because, according to an incomprehensible tradition, we learned the schedule only now, at breakfast. Without wasting any more time, I gulped down a glass of apple juice, and together with Hermione, we joined the stream of students scattering from the hall. The first lesson was a lecture by Binns, where I was doing a much more important thing, calculating a new spell. The lecture itself will be remembered by the brains, but the idea. My cockroaches in my head are scratching on the skull in fits from an acute desire to carry out what they have planned, not in the form of strong-willed magic, but as a well-thought-out spell. In general, I want a laser spell. There is no such thing. I was looking for it. However, due to the fact that I want to fully implement the physical principles, without replacing some properties of materials or energy with the standard magic, I don't know what it is, but I want the same. I have to mobilize all the knowledge about lasers, materials, crystals, alloys, electricity, and a bunch of other information, designing a laser circuit. Of course, it's possible just to buy the appropriate literature, but this is my new hobby, and it is necessary not so much to create a super weapon but to train the mind and concentrate on complex calculations with the help of Rowena's capabilities, but without her participation. From a practical point of view, I'm reinventing the wheel, but I like the process of mental training itself. I'm not a genius, and I don't know everything in the world to design something brilliant in a couple of minutes. After the history of magic, where Professor Binns, or rather his ghost, always told us in a monotonous mumbling tone about the wars with the giants, we went to potions. Everything went according to the classical scheme there. Snape told us that only talented or persistent students will attend the extended course from the 6th to the 7th years inclusive, and told us that all year we will brew complex potions that are asked on OWLS. Malfoy, by the way, did not get nervous at the sight of me and did not give out any snide remarks, and when he clearly wanted to say something and saw Hermione's predatory smile, which was standing in a relaxed pose next to me, somehow turned pale from his face and shuddered. There were all the same students on the ancient runes as in previous years, namely, me, Hermione, Daphne, and Anthony. The topic was the use of runes as fixing, strengthening or changing agents when using spells in the creation of artifacts. The topic is large, extensive, and will be studied throughout the semester. Anthony, as before, did not care about us in general, but he greeted us with joy and even asked how are we doing out of politeness. Daphne continued to turn her nose up, cherishing the old resentment, but every now and then, she looked as if she expected some kind of trick from me. Well, yes, she easily and often communicated with Hermione on the topic of classes in particular and about runes in general. We arrived at the lesson on Dada without delay. Professor Umbridge was already sitting at the teacher's table, and this time she was not wearing a pink suit but a fluffy pink blouse, and she had an equally pink beret on her head. As soon as they entered the classroom, the students quietly and calmly took their seats, laid out their accessories, and tried not to attract the attention of the new professor. It is unknown what kind of feint she will give out. Having settled down with Hermione on the first desk in the middle row, we began to wait for the lesson to begin. Chapter 328. Exactly on time, Umbridge got up from her seat. Hello. Only a few people answered her. Stop, 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 she shook her head. Well, no, my friends. That won't do. I would ask you to respond like this. Hello, Professor Umbridge. One more time, please. Hello, students. Hello, Professor Umbridge. All answered in unison. That's good, the professor sang in a sickly sweet voice. It's not difficult at all, is it? We'll put away the magic wands and take out the feathers. The students reluctantly followed this instruction, and I, in principle, too, without much enthusiasm, sent the wand into a holster on my forearm. The professor pulled out her wand and tapped it on the blackboard. Defense against the dark arts. Return to the fundamental principles, this was the name of the course. To begin with, I would like to note that so far, your learning in this subject has been rather fragmentary. Isn't that right, Professor Umbridge said, turning to face the class and carefully folding her hands on her stomach. Well, I had to agree because I had seen textbooks recommended by old teachers before they began to change like the gloves of a socialite. The teachers were constantly changing, Professor Umbridge continued to say. And not all of them considered it necessary to follow any program approved by the ministry. The result, unfortunately, was that you are much below the level that we have the right to expect from you in the year preceding the OWLS. However, you will be pleased to know that we will now correct these shortcomings. This year, you will study defensive magic according to a carefully compiled, theoretically verified, approved by the ministry program. Please write down the course goals. The professor tapped the board again with her wand. The words that were on it were replaced by others that tell us about the goals of the course. We will have to understand the principles underlying protective magic. Be able to recognize situations in which the use of protective magic is permissible and does not contradict the law. The inclusion of protective magic in the general system of representations for practical use. Of course, we had to rewrite the text, although I did not want to. I will remember it so that I can forget it only with the help of Obliviate. Does everyone have a copy of The Theory of Defensive Magic by Wilbert Slinkhard? Just like last time, we didn't give a decent answer, in Umbridge's understanding, and we had to say loudly, yes. Next, we were given the task to read the first chapter, Basics for Beginners. Both Hermione and I began to read without enthusiasm because we had already read the entire textbook. Well, I've read it, and I can be sure of Hermione. To be fair, I must say that the textbook is not bad. It is written in extremely clear language, although boring to read. It really covers everything from the basics to charms and spells for the 5th year. At the same time, the theory is considered in detail and tells about many nuances that were previously recognized by a completely random method in the Hogwarts library or were gathered together only after reading several different textbooks. However, the practical part was present only for a couple of spells. Gradually, more and more students gave up in their attempts to break through the hard-to-read text and looked somewhere through space. Hermione moved a little closer to me and whispered. There's nothing about using magic. I know. Should I ask the professor about it? Try it if you are interested. Umbridge heard the whispers and looked at us. This was the moment Hermione chose to raise her hand. Seeing that no one was reading anymore and everyone was in a state of prostration, Umbridge smiled. Do you have any questions, Miss Hermione Granger, Professor? Miss Granger, Umbridge nodded. Yes, Professor. I studied the book and did not see any chapters on the practical application of magic there. May I ask what this is related to? This is an innovation for us. You see, my dear, the professor spoke again in a rather sweet voice. The Ministry of Magic has compiled a course designed to fill in the gaps in your theoretical knowledge in the field of protective charms and systematize the existing ones. At the same time, you will learn about protective spells in a safe way, without any risk. Chapter 329. Are we not going to use magic? Ron was indignant. Your hand is not raised, Mr. Weasley. There were questions and theorizing, which each time infuriated Umbridge more and more. The students just shouted from their seats, although the professor obviously loves discipline very much. So there was talk about attacks, dark forces. Parvati asked a good question about the exams, but Umbridge assured that with a good knowledge of the theory, the practical implementation of spells will not be a difficult task. And damn it, she's right. Of the spells available in the book, only a couple require practice, and this practice is provided according to the plan. Protego, for example. By the way, this is a 3rd-year spell. According to the ministry, Umbridge pulled herself together. Theoretical knowledge will be more than enough for you to pass the exam, which, ultimately, is what school education should be aimed at. And I repeat, with a good knowledge of the theory. Then I raised my hand, and the professor noticed me. Your name? Max Knight, Professor. And those spells that, according to the textbook, require practice, will be studied practically. Absolutely, Mr. Knight, Umbridge smiled. The program does provide a few practical lessons on spells that cannot be performed without visual experience on the part of the teacher. Fortunately, there are not many of them. What's the you? Potter wanted to be indignant, but I managed to throw silencio at him wandless and silently. Excuse me, I continued to speak. I'd like to make a small proposal, and maybe you will like it. I'm listening to you carefully, Mr. Knight. The professor looked at me with real curiosity. I propose to make a clear demonstration of the superiority of theory over practice. Take 2 spells, Protego and Expelliarmus. Take 6 students who do not know these spells and divide them into 2 groups. 1 student in each group will diligently study the theory. The second will run through the text a couple of times and try it a couple of times. The third will only practice, that is, movement, words, and image. Protego requires at least 1 time to see the spell, so we will demonstrate it once. Are you, my dear, suggesting to go against the Ministry's program? We all have undivided faith in our government, in the Ministry of Magic. But we are still only 15 years old. A clear demonstration of this righteousness will only strengthen our faith. Umbridge looked at me with a sly squint. You still haven't answered my question, Mr. Knight. Your question does not have a correct answer. Have you ever thought of making your career in politics? In the ministry you would be an excellent addition to the minister's staff. I have been thinking about many options for future activities, but I have not yet come to an unambiguous decision. In that case, I must point out that your proposal makes sense. As an exception, for the only first and last time, and to make you more aware that the adult and highly experienced wizards in the ministry really care about your success, I agree to conduct such an experiment. Students, raise your hand if you are not familiar with the Protego spell. To my surprise, almost everyone raised their hand. Some Slytherins didn't raise it, and I really remember that they used it. I didn't raise my hand, nor did Hermione. Amazing honesty. Umbridge pointed at the Weasley, Thomas, and Brown. It was decided to teach Weasley purely in practice, Thomas, only theory and 1 demonstration. Brown quickly scrolled through the theory and a little practice. Next, we found out who doesn't know Expelliarmus. This time Finnegan, Goyle, and Parkinson were chosen. Goyle will be a practician, Parkinson will be 50-50, and Finnegan will be a theorist. In the office, there was a hand mannequin into which a simple stick was put. Spells would be practiced on it. The theorists and 50-50 were seated in Umbridge's office adjacent to the auditorium and instructed not to touch anything, sit and read. The theorists have 40 minutes, the 50-50 have 15. The practicians begin right now, in the office. A one-way silencing spell was put on the door, and the practice began. Chapter 330. The practitioners were given a task to study the text on spells in 5 minutes. Goyle and Weasley eagerly read the paragraphs while the others waited with interest for developments. 5 minutes later, Umbridge took the books from them and called them to the blackboard, and on the other side of the class, there was a dummy stand, a hand with a wand. So, Mr. Goyle, Umbridge pulled out her wand with a smile. After all, she looks very funny in her pink outfit. Remember the movement and the keyword. Expelliarmus. A dim, small, and neat light ray flew from the professor's wand, perfectly knocked the wand out of the stand, and the professor did not even have to catch it. The wand flew exactly into the palm slightly set aside. She gave the wand to Goyle and set him the task of practicing and returning the wand to its place in the stand hand. Goyle nodded and got down to business. Now you, Mr. Weasley. Memorize the movement of the wand and the verbal form. Protego. A perfectly smooth hemisphere of the shield film appeared around Umbridge. A properly created Protego protective spell has a flat surface and an even distribution of the transparency gradient from the center to the edges. Practice. Time was running out. Minute after minute, attempt after attempt, but the boys were not achieving any success at all, beginning to get a little angry and red-faced. 12 minutes later, the 50-50 came out, Parkinson and Brown. Umbridge showed them the moves and spells, and the girls began to practice. Sometimes the professor corrected the unsuccessful movements of Goyle and Weasley because they pay more attention to practice. Oddly enough, after 20 minutes, it was the girls who began to make serious progress, while Weasley and Goyle only got angrier than before. Parkinson was already knocking out a wand that flew in her direction and with the right force, and Goyle only once achieved a similar result, though he almost broke his handstand, and the wand flew into the wall from Goyle. Brown was creating an uneven and undulating shield film, and Weasley couldn't even do that. When the pure theorists came out, Umbridge stopped the practitioners and showed Protego once for Dean Thomas. "Please, Mr. Thomas," the professor said with a smile. Dean concentrated, waved his wand, clearly saying, "Protego." To everyone's surprise, the guy created a fairly even hemisphere of protection with a near-perfect gradient of transparency. Even though there was an almost imperceptible wave through the film for the first moment. "Excellent, Mr. Thomas," grinned Umbridge. "Wonderful performance of the spell." Dean himself was in shock and looked at us all with a dazed look, causing his concentration to break down and his shield to disintegrate, but it didn't matter anymore. Ours immediately began to applaud, for they saw a tangible difference. "Hush, hush, my dears," Umbridge made a few soothing hand gestures with a smile. "Let us now look at Mr. Finnegan's results. For you," she looked at Seamus, "the demonstration is unfortunately not allowed." Seamus nodded, pointing his wand at an arm stand with a simple stick in it. In sync with the simple, sharp, and proper motion, he uttered, "Expelliarmus." A neat, dim ray flew off his wand and knocked the weapon out of the stand hand. It flew in an arc almost into the hands of Seamus. He had to catch this wand. The audience applauded again, and Seamus showed the trophy in his hands in a gesture of victory. Umbridge put things in order in the audience with another calming gesture and made everyone take their seats. "So, students. During our small experiment, a kind of demonstration, we were able to make sure of a very important thing for all of us. During the same time allotted to students to study spells by different methods, those who devoted this time to a thorough study of the theory achieved the greatest efficiency. Practice, as you could see from the success of Mr. Goyle. There were chuckles in the class because his success was not very good. The strength of successful attempts was too different, and the enemy weapon either flew in the wrong direction at all, or fell, or tried to break through a wall or break a stand arm. The practice, as you could see from the success of Mr. Goyle, was very traumatic for himself and others, and it was also a waste of time. For you, my dears, on the eve of exams, wasting time is an unacceptable luxury. It is for this, as you can see, the obvious reason that the Ministry has decided to organize and systematize your knowledge on such an important subject as protection from dark magic as much as possible. Chapter 331. I raised my hand again. "Do you have any questions, Mr. Knight?" The professor looked at me with a smile. "Just one. I'm sure that not everyone after Hogwarts will go to work in the Ministry or somewhere else. For sure, some will want to continue their studies in more narrow specialties, go to an apprentice, and further. How valuable are the estimates of O.W.L.S. and N.E.W.T.S. in this case? This is a very correct question. Indeed, some students have the misconception that a personal apprenticeship does not depend on grades on such important exams. I consider it my duty to dispel these misconceptions. How do you present a letter to a master who, as it seems to you, is simply obliged to take you as an apprentice? What will you write? "I have very bad grades, but don't believe them. I am a good, literate, and educated wizard." Do not be surprised later that you may not be needed by anyone as a student. Do you have any more questions? No. No, Professor Umbridge, we answered in unison. Wonderful. And now, the professor smiled again. After all, we open the textbook on the 5th page and make an effort, reading and realizing what is written. After such a productive lesson, we went to dinner, and then only Hermione and I went to the Chamber of Secrets. The girl, it turns out, unlike me, prepared a small modest tent where we could study theory. As for the spells, we can practice them outside the tent. It was in this tent that we sat at the table opposite each other, making our personal notes. "Max," Hermione put down her fountain pen and looked at me. "Yes. Why did you put on this show at Dada? Didn't you see where everything was going? Scandal, screams, discontent." "That's right. Now, perhaps, some will understand the importance of theory. Do you think it will prevent them from arranging something crazy?" The girl twisted her hand in the air. "No, I don't think so. But now they won't at least try to sabotage Umbridge. We don't need a vindictive, nasty bitch from the Ministry, who loves and knows how to work with children at the level of Snape." Hermione arched an eyebrow. She expects from us what she is used to, following strict rules, subordination, completing the task just because they said so from above. This does not work with children. We'll see. But you know, Max, I don't think that this will stop them from acting rashly. I will hope that they will not create some kind of club students against the minister, and in the end, everyone will be punished because of them. After working on theory and a little practice, we, under all sorts of spells of concealment and disguise, returned to the Gryffindor's common room, where the lesson from the new Professor Dada was vividly discussed. Classmates vividly shared the experiment's results, and those who were younger delved into it, although at first, skepticism was read in their eyes. It seems that the junior year program is similar to ours. As always, Hermione and I took our sofa, and I once again settled my head more comfortably on the girl's legs. Thoughts from the successfully passed day slipped to another topic. Hermione is both smart and beautiful. Constant physical training has an extremely positive effect on the body and figure. But I still perceive her too. Like an old man, or what when there's no more passion or anything. When you're just comfortable around her, and you don't really need anything. It seems that everything is so, but it is not. I don't want to walk everywhere holding hands and cuddling in corners. Delphine is perceived brighter, though without any subtext. I need some kind of shake-up, yes. A joint wild action. I need to think about that. I need to organize an incredible adventure. Chapter 332. The morning of the second school day erased from my head the treacherous thoughts about the incredible adventure. I think that it will find us by itself. We just need to wait a bit. In the meantime, there is a standard schedule of personal training and school classes. There was a small incident at breakfast in the Great Hall. Correspondence often arrives at this time, and when about 10 different owls flew into the hall, heading for the recipients, I noticed a pirate flying empty. One of the owls flew quite high and dropped a letter that promised to fall exactly into my plate of oatmeal, judging by the trajectory. However, Pirate performed a dizzying maneuver, intercepted the letter, and landed on the table opposite me. Oh ho ho! He hooted smugly in his own style and bulged one eye, looking at me. At the same time, the feathers on his head stood up in even more disorder than usual. Pirate stretched out the paw in which he held the letter, held it in the air for a moment, and opened his claws, continuing to hold the paw over the table and looking into my eyes. As if in a cartoon, the letter gently swayed down on the table, and only after that Pirate stood on both paws. "What are you doing?" I turned to the bird, passing my hand over the letter along the way. "Do you think that if you intercepted the mail, then it will be considered as if you brought it?" Oh ho ho! The guys around him laughed softly. "So, what do you want?" Pirate began to move sideways across the table to a large plate of chopped sausages. I'll never cease to be amazed at the omnivorousness of magical owls. "Everything is clear with you," curly-haired crook smiling. I took out one sausage and handed it to the pirate. He grabbed it, hooted, and flew away. Opening the envelope, I took out a small letter in which Lady Greengrass, in neat, beautiful handwriting, appointed the first lesson for the weekend of this week and asked me to take Hermione with me. I looked at the girl sitting next to me, who was enthusiastically, quickly, but carefully eating everything she could reach, as she immediately noticed my look and arched an eyebrow questioningly. "There is a lesson with the master on the weekend. Are you in?" The girl just nodded. She was too busy eating. I was reminded of scenes from the movies based on the Potter fairy tale, where the now completely different Hermione reproached Weasley for eating all the time. And here she herself eats almost for 3, because every day she gives everything to the fullest and even more. "When exactly?" Hermione asked, finishing her meal. "On Saturday from 11 in the morning, and on Sunday the same." "Have you already decided how we will get out of the castle?" "What is there to think?" I shrugged my shoulders. "We'll go out and go. What will we have now?" Hermione deftly took out a schedule from the bag lying next to her, ran through the lines with her eyes, and then looked at me. "Double charms, then double transfiguration, and then numerology." It turned out that we were not the only ones who finished breakfast, and now, in the general flow of students of different ages and houses, we left the Great Hall and went to the Ravenclaw Tower. During the lessons on charms that day, Professor Flitwick, still standing in front of the class on his improvised stand of Lockhart books, told us for at least 15 minutes about the importance of harsh and merciless preparation for the upcoming O.W.L.S, because our future will depend on the results of the exams for many years to come. Well, I agree with the professor because he tells this for the majority. Some individuals may not worry about the results at all and continue to live on the money earned by their ancestors, drink expensive wines, eat delicious food in elite restaurants, and generally burn out their lives. There are still people like me who decided to study further. However, not everyone, I believe, has already found masters or masters to go to them for training, and the importance of exams for them remains relevant. As a result, after his speech, Professor Flitwick gave us a task to practice summoning charm, Oxio, without which it is impossible to imagine passing the practical part of the O.W.L.S on charms and spells. After the lesson, Hermione and I approached the professor to discuss the further plan of our research, but to our great regret, the professor suspended this project. Don't get me wrong, the little professor hesitated and jumped down from his improvised platform. Research and project activities within the walls of Hogwarts are not shown in any way. Professors can pursue their own personal ideas, but involve students as equal colleagues or even as assistants is a no-no. It turns out, Hermione frowned a little. Umbridge's presence. Yes, the professor nodded. I have no moral right to compromise such talented and promising students as you, Miss Granger, and you, Mr. Knight. However, the professor glanced behind our backs and, finding no one, turned his gaze back to us. We can exchange the results of our mental labors. And I, as a professor, can recommend to you a variety of literature. The only thing that is unacceptable for our work is practice. It's okay, Professor, I smiled weakly. This is more than an acceptable development of events. That's wonderful. Flitwick was delighted and ran to his office, and as soon as we approached the door that had just closed behind him, it immediately opened again. Flitwick was standing on the threshold, handing us obviously handmade files from a pile of identical-looking parchments. Perhaps these are documents copied by magic. Here. Over the summer, I worked a little on the theory. Perhaps you, with a fresh look, will be able to separate the grains of truth from the chaff of ideas. We'll do our best, Hermione smiled, and we each took a copy, immediately hiding it in our bags. In this case, in a week, also after class, please prepare your notes on these materials. And questions. And suggestions. If there will be. We'll work in this, not particularly rich in practice, mode. The professor hurried to start preparing for the next classes. We went to another tower and another floor, where Professor McGonagall is probably waiting for us, preparing to teach her subject. Chapter 333. Professor McGonagall almost repeated Flitwick's words verbatim at Transfiguration, except that the intonation was much more strict, and the look was severe. In these classes, we were analyzing a rather complex vanishing spell, Evanesco. They say that it is quite complex, and in general, it is one of the most difficult on OWLS. What can I say? I have known this spell for a long time and sometimes clean up any obscenity with it. Although Turjo and a stronger Scour Jiffy are better suited for various cleaning. As an object for training, we were given snails. If I didn't have a good sensitivity to magic, I would even think that they are real. No, they are certainly real and material, but they are the product of transfiguration. Only a blind person would not have noticed how McGonagall glances furtively at Hermione and me, clearly expecting instant and phenomenal success because we have achieved a lot in the field of transfiguration. The same apparition is already an achievement. In general, after exchanging glances with the girl, we decided not to disappoint the professor. We made the transfigured snail disappear on the first attempt, immediately earning 10 points to the house. At numerology, we were told that this year we will pay a lot of attention to quite ordinary mathematical operations, inequalities, various quadratic equations, sets, and systems. Of course, we will learn to interpret all this from the point of view of magic, while we will study real areas of application in the theory of creating new ones or justifying old spells. At dinner in the Great Hall, I was surprised to learn that Potter managed to run into Umbridge at the big break in front of witnesses, argue with her, make her lose her temper, and get a week of punishment. I absolutely do not understand how this works for him. Well, he went all last night and today, whining, they say, there is not enough practice on Dada. We will not learn anything, a stupid theory, a terrible toad teacher. I wouldn't be surprised if he ran into Umbridge at the very moment when he was complaining to Ron about life, and then it was just a matter of technique. In fact, the manner in which Umbridge communicates is completely unsuitable for children, and especially for not particularly intelligent children. Of course, if Potter had a more intellectually developed environment, he would have been smarter, would have been able to control himself, and not succumb to cheap provocations, but alas. In the evening, in the Gryffindor's common room, sitting with Hermione on our sofa and in the company of Dean, Seamus, Lavender, and Parvati, I had the opportunity to watch a very interesting scene. A famous hero of all England was making a speech to a crowd of people, like Lenin from an armoured car. Prevent. Do not allow. Do not put the school to shame. It's not that he started to make a speech on purpose, it just happened that way. One asked him, "How are you?" The other, "What do you think?" More students were passing nearby, they heard a discussion of a burning topic, and this snowball began to grow, and a crowd of onlookers had already gathered around the discussing Harry, Ron, and the twins. In general, the crowd decided that it could not continue like this, although it had just begun. Potter, by the way, periodically rubbed his right hand, which means that Umbridge's methods of punishment remained the same. "Do you think it's a good thing?" Hermione asked when I traditionally rested my head on her legs. "What exactly?" "The others are clearly going to do something stupid." "I have no idea." I closed my eyes. It's worth remembering who Dolores Umbridge is. She is the Assistant Minister of Magic. Some call her the chain dog of the Ministry. A tough careerist, but at the same time does not have any political point of view. No, not like that. Umbridge has a very clear position on many issues, but she is the kind of person who keeps her opinions to herself. She is unconditionally loyal to the Minister of Magic, and if he says, "Burn the purebloods," she will be the first to burn them. If he says, "Burn the Muggleborns," Umbridge will again be in the forefront. She approaches her task with all the responsibility and enthusiasm of which she is capable. Her word is a minister's word. Max, Parvati, who was sitting at a table next to me, interrupted me. I opened my eyes and was surprised to find that now students of all ages are beginning to gather around us. "Yes. You keep saying minister, but you didn't say fudge." "Well done for noticing, Parvati. The point is simple." I settled my head more comfortably, and Hermione ran her hand through my hair. "Umbridge is loyal to the position, not to the person. If Dumbledore becomes a minister, she will act in his interests and say what Dumbledore says. If you know who becomes minister, the story will be exactly the same. Whoever becomes Minister of Magic, Umbridge will always follow his policies and goals faithfully, be it Merlin, Morgana, Mordred, Grindelwald, or Lockhart." "Lockhart, yet," someone said, while the others chuckled. "He would have made a great minister, with his memory loss." Chapter 334. "So, what does this give us?" Ron muttered as he and Potter sat down on the floor next to another sofa by the fireplace. "Oh, it's very simple, my red-haired friend." I took an upright position on the sofa, and Hermione pressed against my shoulder, forcing me to put my arm around her. "Tell me, what position does Fudge take in relation to us, Hogwarts and Dumbledore at the moment?" "How do I know what's in this Fudge's head?" "From the Daily Prophet, of course." The Daily Prophet, let it be known to you, is an absolutely ministerial newspaper. If you read between the lines, you can learn a lot of new things. "And what is it?" one of the twins asked. "For example, when the escape from Azkaban was made, 2 weeks later they wrote, obvious traces of the darkest magic were found, and Minister Fudge took the matter under personal control. What conclusions can we draw? But everything is written. What's there to think about?" Ron waved his hands, pushing Harry a little with his hand. "Sorry, buddy." "It's okay." Potter rubbed his right hand and sat down so as to hide it from everyone. "Wrong. We can say that neither the DMLE nor the Aurors know exactly how the criminals escaped. This is about the darkest magic. In the interpretation of the Ministry, everything that they cannot understand is the darkest. Personal control. No one can either pick up the trail of the fugitives, or find them, and in general, the Ministry is powerless, but don't worry. The Minister of Magic himself is dealing with this issue. Yet, it's kind of strange. Now think about it." I looked around at all the people gathered, of whom there were already quite a few. What was written in the Daily Prophet about the headmaster, Potter, and Hogwarts? Let me remind you, an old senile man lies as he breathes and brings a beautiful school to collapse. His protege, Harry Potter, is a crazy psycho. The school is a hotbed of lawlessness and crime, and the teachers are garbage from the street. The headmaster and Potter are blatantly lying about the Dark Lord, undermining the authority of the ministry, and the old senile man is aiming for the minister's chair. The students murmured, and for a dozen seconds from all sides, only bewildered and angry statements were heard, the addressees of which were all in a row. When the students calmed down a little and Hermione settled her head more comfortably on my shoulder, I looked at Harry, waiting for his reaction. Potter looked at me with a serious look. I'm not lying. He really came back. I just nodded in response and started talking about another topic. After the tournament, when Dumbledore told Fudge about the revival of you-know-who, the minister said, "This will destroy everything we have achieved over the years. Make no mistake. Fudge believes in his rebirth, but he will never confirm this information. He will refute it in every possible way and discredit those who say the opposite. At the moment, Fudge has set himself a goal to discredit Hogwarts, the headmaster, and Potter. Note that you believe what is written in the Daily Prophet after the summer, but you do not believe Harry. How many times have you been burned because you didn't believe him, and then it turned out that it was in vain?" The people whispered a little, nodded, or, on the contrary, became even more sulky from the fact that the liar was being acquitted. So, what about Umbridge? Seamus put aside his favorite cards. What about her? Like I said, Umbridge's position is that of a minister. She's here to shake us up properly and squeeze out all the conspiracies, plans, disobedience, and so on, and it does not matter whether it really exists or not. Even this ministerial program. On the one hand, it is effective, but on the other hand, the effect of such a study will be short-lived, and the program itself is completely unfamiliar to us. Anything unfamiliar throws people off balance, irritates them. She will push us, shake us, make us break down and do stupid things, and already these stupid things will untie her hands. She needs the fact that some violation has been committed, after which she will execute the punishment. Here's Harry, for example. Why Harry? Right away Ron was indignant. What did you tell her that you earned a week's punishment? By the way, Angelina, who became the captain of our Quidditch team, almost screamed loudly. How could you, Harry? On Friday, the selection for the keeper, and I told you that we need a full turnout. Later, Angelina, I calmly interrupted the girl, condensing and increasing the volume of magic around me. To everyone's surprise, Angelina fell silent, puffed angrily for a couple of seconds, and nodded in agreement. Harry. Well. Potter looked at us all. I said we need practice because we have to learn how to defend ourselves. Right said that since Voldemort is reborn, we're all in danger. She started denying it and calling me a liar. Potter clenched his fists. Well, I said that I was not lying, but she denied everything and did not listen to me. That's how it turned out. Chapter 335. Now, I looked around at the crowd. I'll explain the point. You, Harry, have gone against the minister's opinion and policy. This is unacceptable to Umbridge on the one hand, but on the other, it is exactly what she expects. Anything we do that goes against the ministry's position will be perceived as rebellion and treason. Our job is to pull ourselves together and not give a reason. And what if, Dean, who was sitting across from Seamus at the table, spoke in a serious tone. As a theory, suppose what the Daily Prophet says is true. Judging by the quiet discussion that immediately arose, the opinions of the students were divided. Hey, I'm not lying. Potter tried to jump up, but the twins pulled him back to where he was sitting with his hands on his shoulders. Silence quickly fell around, and the students, who were sitting and standing where they had to, were again ready to listen. I'm in a hurry to upset everyone. The Dark Lord's return is true. I've had the dubious pleasure of dealing with blood purity radicals, Death Eaters, and others who have joined the Dark Lord or are just about to do so. I even beat one of them in a duel, although he initially underestimated me and only wanted to beat me up, throw some crucio at me, and show me my place. While everyone was looking at each other in bewilderment, I looked at Potter. I also saw one person there who is known to you and me. Even two. The Dark Lord is gaining supporters. Those who escaped from Azkaban are recovering intensively and already now do not look like those who have been sitting in this terrible place for many years. The guys were quiet, and many turned pale. Neville, standing a little further away, looked terrible and general white as a sheet. But then all the more reason for all of us to practice. Potter spoke up eagerly. We should be able to defend ourselves. Pfft! Snorted Hermione and tried to cover her smile with her hand. What did I say that's so funny? The girl moved slightly, getting more comfortable, and without lifting her head from my shoulder, she spoke with a completely insane grin inherent in her battle mask. Do you want to compete with an adult experienced wizard? Do we have a choice? Harry looked around at everyone. It is clear to me that the Ministry is not going to acknowledge Voldemort's return. We're all in danger, and there's nowhere to wait for help. I'm not saying we should fight. I'm saying we should be able to defend ourselves. It's amazing sometimes how a spark of intelligence erupts in Potter. Suppose so, I nodded. And what do you plan to do? Get a group of like-minded people together. Who will be the teacher? Where will you study? I bet that when. Notice not if but when. When Umbridge finds out that under her nose, a large group of students is obviously breaking her rules and practicing protective magic. Ooh, what will happen? Everyone was dejectedly silent. Let's do this, I slapped my free hand on the knee. Gather like-minded people from all the houses. Think about how to make sure that no one blabbed about you. Look for someone to teach you. I'll show you the room. It's pretty secret, only a few people know about it, and getting into it is a non-trivial task. And what is your benefit? One of the twins asked a very reasonable question. I want to see what you will get out of it. After these words, our impromptu meeting of the house began to dissolve, breaking up into companies based on interests, and Harry and Ron clearly lit up with the idea of gathering a group of students to learn various spells together. Why would you want to do that? Asked Hermione, not removing her head from my shoulder. I want to see what they'll be capable of and what they possess at the moment. You're not thinking of teaching them, are you? Will kill a lot of time for that, and it'll be little more than zero use. No, not at all. I'm thinking of attending their classes when we need to learn theory or do other mental research. Then that's fine.
That is all for today. Thank you for watching. If you've enjoyed this journey, make sure to subscribe and ring that notification bell. If you have any suggestions or feedback for me, please drop a comment down below.